This is my childhood Xbox 360. I know this baby better than the back of my hand because I've seen it more than I've seen either of my hands. Before getting this thing, I was like constantly begging my parents to let me save up my weekly $5 allowance so that I could buy an old, crusty, used 360. You see, I really loved games that came out in 2008 and had Unleashed in their name, that being Sonic and Star Wars The Force. The thing is, I'd only ever played the inferior Wii versions of those games, and I'd seen footage of those games running on this machine, and I just needed to experience what the true next generation of gaming felt like. But instead of saying yes, my parents put me on a treadmill with a 360 controller hanging from a string just out of reach. They told me I wasn't even allowed to buy an Xbox with my own money because I already had too many game consoles. Man, an upper middle class childhood is so hard. You see, this model though dropped in mid-2010, and my parents got it for me that same year. Turns out they weren't being jerks, they just didn't want me to waste $150 on something that already bought me. Thanks, Mom. Thanks, Dad. You gaslit me for the greater good. And yeah, I basically replayed these Unleashed games until there were nothing but skin and bones. But as I aged and became a fully grown middle schooler, the childlike ability to just endlessly replay a 5-hour-long game slowly deteriorated. I simply required more to be stimulated. And that came in the form of Xbox Live. The day this thing got connected to the internet was the day my social life died and became reborn online. And on top of that, at some point, a copy of Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 magically materialized in my house. Booted it up on a whim, and yeah, I was hooked. After playing the campaign 40 times, I began my next years-long crusade of asking my parents to get me Xbox Live Gold. That way I could play the online multiplayer, just expand my horizons. The whole thing took a lot of fending off bogus arguments of online stranger danger and racism, but eventually my hard work paid off, and I was successful. And you know, hey, over a decade of use, several thrown controllers, and thousands of hours of playtime clock later, this thing still works. And it's pretty easy for me personally to say that this little box in all its forms was magical for me and for a lot of other people out there who grew up on it. The 360 itself sprung onto the scene just as the World Wide Web first started indecently exposing itself to every household in America. It was the sequel to the successful original Xbox and followed the 2003 launch of Xbox Live on said first Xbox, where some of the first ever instances of long-distance teabagging took place. And the 360's version of Xbox Live would go on to practically shape online gaming as we know it, even as it is today. This thing created a whole connected social layer across your whole sad little gamer life. For the first time, you too could catalog everyone you'd recently encountered across all the different games that you got called slurs on. Then you could message any of them and predict their future.
So yeah, you're gay.
The thing is, being able to play online on this machine at all was kept behind a monthly subscription. Meanwhile, its competitor, the PlayStation 3, had online play for free. You know, intuitively, this should have made it the preferred place to play with your friends, but there is exactly one human being on Earth who talks about PSN the way the rest of us do Xbox Live. And you don't hear from them because they're busy mourning the death of PlayStation Home. The reason that the Xbox Live community is seen so much more fondly is because, in part, they just got there first, they were quicker on the draw, but I would say the main reason is because of the culture that Xbox Live created. What some people might consider flaws of the service actually gave it a lot of its identity. From the aesthetic of the really shit mics to having to pay for access, it felt like pressing that big Xbox logo in the middle of your controller took you to a real place, an exclusive club, where being a part of that group came with prestige. Also, PSN did not have party chat, so that probably hurt it a lot.
Can I dick slap you?
But like, seriously, we literally had COD sniping clans reenacting segregation. For the better part of a decade, and this is real, you were not allowed to be a FaZe member if you didn't play on the 360. For me though, the Xbox and Xbox Live alongside it became like a physical place in my house. I would get home from school every day and immediately sit my ass down on the couch to hop on Halo Reach and mess around in Forge, or run some Nuketown 1v1 sniper matches with my friends both IRL and online. And that was a point in my life where I desperately needed a place like that. 6th grade was fucking dookie and I was depressed all the time, but through it all, I had my Xbox. In this machine, I had this little slice of community that was insulated from everything actually going on around me. This little guy became sacred to me, like a loved one. So when my mom banned me from the Xbox for 2 months because I got a C in math, I was devastated. My virtual third place, my safe space was gone, and my grades didn't even get any better because of it. It might be an overstatement to say that I became codependent on this machine, but it works. But its absence did leave an Xbox-shaped hole in my sternum that still bleeds to this day. and I only got my 360 permissions back when on my birthday, Mom said I could play it again, but only for the birthday. And I'm like, yeah, I bet. But then the day ends, and I try to test something bold. I played it the next day to see if she would stop me, and she never did. This experience made me realize I am an idiot. You see, she had only ever said that I couldn't use the Xbox, and my dumbass just listened. She never hid it or moved it somewhere else. It just sat unused in the same spot, hooked up to the TV the entire time. I could have just lied. Still, the pain I felt during that all gave me the perspective I needed to realize how lucky I was to have avoided a fate far worse than getting grounded. That is of the infamous mark of the beast. The red ring of death. These days, the Xbox 360 is looked back at mostly with nostalgia and regarded by many as the greatest video game console of all time. Hailed for its revolutionary online capabilities and banger slate of exclusive games. And when the 360 first came out in 2005, most people were over the moon playing Call of Duty 2. This power button was magical. When you pressed it, it would light up a brilliant green, and 4 green lights around the button itself indicated how many controllers were connected to the actual Xbox. The thing is, it did not take long for rumors to start spreading of consoles breaking right after they got out of the box. If you got on the green ring's bad side, it would start seeing red and shine 3 blood red lights at you that said, "Congratulations, you now own a $400 brick." As time passed and 2006 was well underway, these proved to be much more than rumors as more and more 360s succumbed to the 3 red lights. That symbol took on a legend of its own and earned the Daedric artifact sounding name of the Red Ring of Death, inheriting its namesake from Microsoft's other icon of sin, the blue screen of death. It felt like this thing was everywhere. It got news coverage, affected stock prices, and everybody was talking about it online all the time. Gamers truly lived in fear that their Xbox might be next, and it felt impossible to find someone who didn't have a red ring story of their own. And we're talking exponential growth over time here. The more time that passed, the bigger the issues seemed to get. Meanwhile, Microsoft didn't say a single word about the red ring. Their house was on fire, and they seemed pretty relaxed about it. The loss of an Xbox 360 sent countless people into pure desperation. Some people were smashing their console to pieces in their frustration, while some people tried to bring their beloved Xbox back to life by following WikiHow tutorials or sometimes just sticking it in the fucking oven. At its climax, it felt like just about every 360 in the wild was doomed to die from the red ring, and it threatened to take the entire Xbox brand down with it unless Microsoft did something. So, after about a year and a half of doing what felt like nothing, Microsoft finally acknowledged the problem existed. They did do more than that, though. They promised to fix every 360 that red ringed for free. Microsoft covered all of the costs of the process for every customer that was affected on their own dime, and that shit was not cheap. The Red Ring of Death is one of the most expensive and widespread wonders in consumer electronics history. It has permanently branded itself onto not just the legacy of Xbox, but the entire gaming industry and even beyond. The Red Ring is referred to today as the exact kind of disaster you should take every possible step to avoid when building something of your own. But on the other hand, the Xbox 360's response and recovery is often cited as the exact way you should respond if this does happen, where no matter how deep in the hole you get, you don't just give up. And sitting on those two connected examples of opposite extremes, it made me really think. With how big this Xbox of wonders takes up in my brain and my memories, I started to realize just how little I actually know about it. Like, what actually was the Red Ring? Where did Microsoft even get the gumption to make a console? They were already like a bajillion-dollar company. I wasn't satisfied with what I found by just like skimming stuff, so I went deeper and deeper and deeper, and now this video is 2 hours long. It is a story that goes back to the origins of where the X and Xbox came from. The Xbox brand, and by extension, the Red Ring, was a perfect storm of circumstances. Financial to technological advancements, the culture of Xbox as a company, the gaming industry, and even the world at large. It all came together to create one of the greatest consoles and one of the most bizarre fuck-ups in gaming history. And it does get grimy down there. So before we get into the down and dirty stuff, I want to tell you about something I've been unironically really excited about. I have struggled to keep my trap shut about this for the better part of a year. G-Sub's cup. This design is quite frankly unhinged, and I'm not sure how I got away with half the shit on this work of art that I did. Also, did I mention that it's double-sided? You got the Canon-accurate ass and the newly added titties. I know so many of y'all feel some kind of way looking at me, and especially feel it with this image. Look at it! And I finally found a solution. You can now drink directly out out of me. Have fun with that. I'm gonna turn the irony off for a second here. I have genuinely been working on this thing for so fucking long. I got really annoying about small details, like which part of the cup should be transparent, things like the position of the tentacle under my mask, and of course the size of my ass, obviously. Listen, y'all gotta see this. The lid is green like me, the cap is black like my sunglasses, and the shaker inside is blue like my mask, okay? I just think it's neat, even if it sounds stupid to have those feelings over something like this. I have them. G-Subs has been so fucking sick at helping me make something really special to me, and I'm not just talking about the cup. You've probably noticed by now that I look a little different, like physically. Well, yeah, this hoodie is like the first piece of honest-to-God clothing I've dropped in like 3 to 4 years, and I wanted to make it really special. You've got like the different colored cuffs, the general color blocking, the tentacle going down the one arm. You can put this on and fulfill all your dreams of getting inside me easily. But one thing I haven't gotten to show y'all yet is the back. Y'all gotta peep this. I promise that I'm not just squatting to show you my ass. That's only part of it. But look at me. I'm literally staring at you. Isn't that awesome? If you guys want to see more of it, it's gonna be in the corner just crucified on the wall the whole video. I gotta be so real. The G-Subs shirts, hoodies, pants, and every other piece of clothing I make are the genuine most comfortable clothing I own. Potential TMI warning. I don't know if y'all know, but I have like generally sensitive skin and also a skin condition called hyperhidrosis. It basically causes me to sweat excessively. I have meds for it, but even then, like, I still get like rashes really easily because of it, like around my neck. And having the clothes that G-Subs make out of the materials they do has been like a godsend for me. You can get everything I've just shown here at the first link in the description and get 10% off anything on G-Subs with my code Kwite, including all of my stuff. Turning the irony off for a second, I really can't thank G-Subs enough for making this video possible, as well as helping me make my first clothing drop in forever, something that I'm really proud of, as well as these babies. Either way, thank you again for making it possible for me to do this kind of shit. Both the video and the cup with the ass cheeks on them, but it means the world to me that I get to do this day in, day out.
Hello, my fellow Americans. Buy my shaker cup. And this is Xbox Origins, Wolverine.
Alright, listen. The thing is, Microsoft is an old-ass company, so to really get this, we have to go back to the beginning. From when Microsoft were still just the software dorks who made Windows. You see, software includes the video gaming, and you should know that making games on Windows has always been freaking epic. Microsoft's revolutionary PC software was called WinG, which made it easier to create and play games on Windows than ever before. And Microsoft wanted to make a big show of what WinG could do too. So they shot for the moon and sidled up to Disney, yes, Walton, middle name Disney Afton with puppy eyes, and convinced them to let Microsoft port the incredibly successful Lion King game to Windows. Microcock told Disney that they would market the game as an official product on Windows 3.1 for that Christmas. Hopefully to make money, but also to show how sick nasty gaming on the Windows machine could be. Disney is all in. They say yes and send out 300,000 copies of the Lion King game for Windows 95, prepping for major success. When the big day came around, that powder keg was ready to blow, as in blow ass, blow jobs if you want to make it an Apple thing. The Windows Lion King port was a 4-bats career level disaster. There was a critical core error in it that made the Windows version of the game crash more than Kia Soul drivers. The PR look was obviously terrible, where this rake that Microsoft willingly stepped on handed every game developer who already believed Windows was awful for PC gaming all the evidence they needed on a gangrene-covered platter. Worse yet, thousands of parents were pissed off that the game they bought their kids for Christmas ended up making their kids cry. Child havers were flooding Disney's customer service lines and demanding a solution to the issue. So Disney, getting straight grease burns from entrusting their beloved IP to Microsoft, came at the company with the full force you'd expect of Disney's legal team. So yeah, I'm a big fat lying liar. Making games on Windows was not awesome, nor epic. It actually sucked. Lion King compatibility patches eventually got pushed out, which smoothed over issues with the game and massaged tensions on both ends. But it made Microsoft realize they had a problem. It wasn't just sentiment. As far as anybody could tell, making and playing PC games on Windows actually just blew sexy red level ass. You see, throughout the 80s, DOS or Disk Operating System was the most used operating system, or OS, on personal computers. PCs, if you want to be politically correct. But by the early 90s, Windows held a bigger chunk of flesh in the homunculus that was the OS market. This is because it was just more capable than DOS, who had its legs and lowest hanging testicle in the grave already. Despite that though, most PC games were still developed for and played on DOS, mostly because, again, doing those things on Windows sucked. And by games, I mean Doom. DOS nerds loved playing Doom. Microsoft didn't like that. They wanted that games on Windows. So they needed something better than WinG. The skeleton of a solution formed in the minds of three ambitious dorks at Microsoft. One, Alex St. John, a Craig Eisler, and an Eric Enstrom, who tragically passed in 2020. Rest in peace. These three have often been referred to as misfits in Microsoft, and they also became known as the Beastie Boys because of how obnoxious to upper brass they were. The three had to fight off attempts to fire them multiple times. Both these monikers came from the fact that the baby they were birthing was made without any consent from Microsoft, a fetus lovingly named Game SDK. Behind the scenes, the Beastie Boys had a funnier name for their infant, internally calling their unsanctioned sideshow the Manhattan Project, dubbed so because these tools were meant to disrupt Japan's domination of the gaming industry. You know, like the nuclear bomb did in World War II. This has aged incredibly well. Game SDK / the Manhattan Project was meant to be a clean slate for everything gaming related on Windows. It was a new suite of tools that would make games run better and easier to develop on Windows than it ever was with WinG. Passion motivates us all, and the tools were coded under crunch that would make stepping on a leaf in the fall seem quiet. The hope was to give Game SDK a grand reveal at the Computer Game Developer Conference, nowadays known as just GDC, in April 1995. Craig Eisler had only started to code Game SDK in December 1994, where that first version was only held together with spit, duct tape, and hours of missed time watching your children grow up. Eisler finished a barely working build of Game SDK just the night before GDC. At the event, when it was revealed, a journalist made a passing comment that dominoed into one of the mightiest gaming empires that has ever managed to collapse under its own hubris. You see, every tool in Game SDK had direct in its name: direct draw, direct sound, one direction, direct play, and this unsung branding savant joked that the tools were DirectX, as in direct access. It was meant in a kind of mean and mocking way, only for the team to just run with that anyways on some Deku shit. The legacy of this X runs long and is the literal cross that Microsoft built their gaming chapel atop. And DirectX's reveal got the Beastie Boys some credibility at Microsoft, but the tools were not in a state that they could be released in, and because of that was nowhere to be seen at the August 1995 launch of Windows 95. It took 4 more months of superhuman / subhuman crunch from that GDC in April all the way till September 1995 for the first version of DirectX to be C-sectioned out of the womb and revealed to the world. It was launched on Windows 95 as simply Windows Game SDK. That's awesome! But the problem was, most developers still thought Windows had the stench of shit on it, and they weren't willing to give a shot at making games on it. DirectX needed a big proof of concept to show what it could do. It needed to succeed where Lion King had failed. Alex St. John's idea was basically going to gaming companies and saying, "Could you please give us your source code? We'll port it to Windows for free, and if you like it, you can even sell the port for money, maybe?" :3. He said that :3 out loud somehow, but the Hail Mary that DirectX needed came from Archangel Gabriel Newell. Newell also thought that games currently sucked on Windows, but there was a chink in the armor, or an Asian if you're politically correct. You see, Newell estimated that Doom was the most installed program in the world, existing on more PCs than Windows itself. The only thing that gamers in the 90s knew how to do was eat hot chip, play Doom on DOS, and there is no third thing. Gamers would get Doom running on a treadmill so that they could play Doom while running on a thing running Doom if they could, and the obvious punchline is that they already did that. So the mission for the DirectX team wasn't just to get Doom running on Windows, but to make the Windows port the definitive version of the game to play. Alex St. John secured the support of Doom's creator John Cormack, and his polyamorous team of engineers got to work getting Doom not just running, but flying on Windows using DirectX. What resulted was Doom 95 releasing in August 1996. Doom 95 included not just Doom, but Doom 2 and Final Doom as well, with features that were completely exclusive to Windows at the time, like a hyper-realistic 640 by 480 pixel screen resolution and a streamlined ability to run custom maps in multiplayer matches. They successfully made it the best version of Doom that you could physically play, and a success like that deserved a celebration. But that celebration was also an opportunity for Microsoft. Good games aside, Microsoft still reeked of a different kind of stench: sterile corporate office. They were seen as the corporate tech giant that was cold, calculating, and for Silicon Valley dweebs. The company needed to not only prove that games worked on Windows, but that Microsoft's culture was one that nurtured the process of making games. A place that was for creatives, not just an anti-art profit-making machine. So, they got wacky. The Doom 95 launch party is said to have featured the stuff of legends. It had a live performance from fucking Gwar, haunted house areas to explore, and themed developer booths. Where id Software, the studio still behind Doom to this day's booth, was an 8-foot tall vagina that had 100 penises strung up hanging off said cooter. I'm not joking. thing. That happened. Alex St. John recalled that some execs were not very happy with the 4-foot schlong spraying blood, and if executives didn't like that, then the main attraction probably gave them hernias. This is a clip of a video that played on a big-ass screen during the party the whole night.
These games are getting really realistic. We think the PC really is the entertainment platform for the future. Our commitment is to make the tools, to make the platform better and better.
Yeah.
Don't interrupt me.
That is authentic footage of Bill Gates in a school shooter trench coat pretending to kill demons inside of the Doom video game, 1993. Absolute cinema! Bill Gates, the man that many saw as corporate enterprise personified, was apparently down to have a little fun with the whole thing and just do some stupid, hokey shit. It was an attempt to tell developers, hey, Microsoft is more than a corporate hell. We also have whimsy. As the 90s neared their end and trudged towards the new millennia, the bets Microsoft made on DirectX bore fruit. Microsoft saw success with games developed and published in-house. Age of Empires sold 3 million units and raked in $120 million gross by 2000. And beyond that, Microsoft's games division published several games through acquisitions that also saw success. As DOS became older and more cumbersome, Windows 95 became the biggest operating system in the world. And by the end of the 90s, DOS barely had any new games releasing on it at all, and Windows became the place to develop and play PC games. Microsoft's games division, under the leadership of Ed Fries, became a profitable part of the company, which had earned Fries the respect of Bill Gates himself. All of this, though, was still software, and it fell in line with Microsoft wanting at least a piece of, if not dominance, in every aspect of the industry they were already known for. What ultimately pushed Microsoft into earnestly considering a dedicated gaming console wasn't just their wins in PC gaming, it was more importantly the unprecedented success and the existential threat of the PlayStation 1. The PS1 was the first console in history to ship over 100 million units, and it was the undisputed champion of the 5th generation of consoles, outpacing both the Sega Saturn and Nintendo 64 in sales to the tune of tens of millions. And in a less measurable, more vibes sort of way, the PS1 pushed gaming as a medium much closer to mainstream acceptance. The reason this scared the nipple pasties off Microsoft was that the OG PlayStation let Sony get something with processing power into the living rooms of millions of households. Gaming changed the game, so to speak. Those are words I thought of saying in that order myself because it's cool. Fuck you. So when the PlayStation 2 spins the block like Tetris again, this only compounds Microsoft's fears. The PS2 was marketed as an explicitly multimedia machine. It had an optical internet adapter, later models had built-in Ethernet, and the PS2 was an early adopter of the brand new DVD format, able to play DVDs natively and at a price much lower than a standalone DVD player cost at the time. All while also still being a funky little gaming machine. And funky little gaming machines were only getting more powerful, capable of doing more and more stuff. Sony's gamer doohickey was selling like hotcakes and spreading like oral herpes to living rooms around the globe. At Microsoft, the idea of a dark future started to form that proposed, what if the PS2 ends up replacing the PC? And they weren't just dooming out about the whole thing, the threat was plausible. Like Christ, when the PS2 was being launched, it was described as a Trojan horse into the living room. Articles were speculating on whether it had the potential to completely replace the personal computer, and the PS2 even had an official kit that let you run Linux off the thing. You could literally use it as a PC. Much gossip was gossiped about how powerful the PS2 apparently was as well. For instance, Saddam Hussein. You might recall an old crackpot rumor about the tunnel guy buying thousands of PlayStation 2s with the aim of making a supercomputer out of them. It was reported in an article that had some suspiciously pro-GlazeStation 2 excerpts. Most Americans don't realize each PlayStation contains a 32-bit CPU, just as powerful as a processor found in most computers. The graphics capabilities of a PS2 are 5 times more powerful than that of a typical graphics workstation, and roughly 18 times more powerful than the graphics cards found in most PCs. PlayStation computers could be used in the design of nuclear weapons. Even if they're telling the truth, it still feels like propaganda. These days, we can see that gaming consoles didn't kill the PC by even Mr. Fantastic's biggest stretch. But back then, this was new territory for everybody, and in Microsoft's eyes, the threat was too big a risk to ignore. Microsoft's fear of some other corporation controlling the living room were not helped by their previous failures trying to get into the console market. At one point, Bill Gates even wanted Sony to use Microsoft's programming tools to make games, but got denied because Sony CEO Nobuyuki Ide knew that using Microsoft's stuff meant relying on their architecture, with Ide saying that Bill Gates apparently started tweaking pretty hard when he got told no. Soon though, the next step in gaming for Microsoft started to strip tease and slowly reveal itself. The Beastie Boys had their time in the sun, and their efforts with DirectX successfully kickstarted gaming as a force within Microsoft, forcing a culture shift in how the company operated. But the trailblazers who led the company's foray into the console market were 4 members of that thriving DirectX team. They were 4 renegades, as Xbox affectionately calls them: Kevin Bacchus, Seamus Blackley, Otto Burks, and Ted Hayes. They just love giving these dudes like YouTube group channel-ass names. The Renegades' idea was simple: create a console that was built to play games made with DirectX. This would give developers who already made PC games a console on the market that was familiar to program for. It was envisioned as a PC disguised as a console that had standardized hardware to program for, which took out the guesswork of how much power any given person's PC would have. Optimizing for it was a one-size-fit-all sort of deal. The first documented meeting that the Renegades ever had was apparently on March 30th, 1999, a year to the day before I was born, meaning it was basically my life's purpose to become unnecessarily autistic about Xbox as a brand. Still, the creation of a console like this is no small Minecraft build, so you need a goal to shoot for. A large motivator for the crew was disrupting the stranglehold Japan had on console gaming at the time. Back then, the guts inside most consoles were hardware very unique to each company, and figuring out how to program for them for Western developers was like trying to read Braille in the Reggie caves as a kid, because the development manuals for these consoles were written in Japanese. The Renegades saw this as an untapped market of English-speaking developers who already made games with DirectX, lacking a console that they could easily program for. The console they were making could theoretically be the first major American-produced console in decades, an ambition seen in how the Renegades talked about the project behind the scenes. You see, DirectX's codename was the Manhattan Project because it tried to upend Japanese dominance on game development tools, and is even where the original Radiation logo that served to represent the X early on came from. Similarly, the Xbox's top-secret internal codename was Midway, named after the turning point in the Pacific theater of World War II where the United States managed to finally get a leg up on Japan. They were gonna disrupt that gaming console market. Those Japanese people had their turn. Finally, the white man's answer to video games. However, the official codename of said white man's answer was a product of convenience. If the Renegades were the scrappy upstarts at Microsoft with a dream, trying to make waves in the company culture, Nat Brown was their wise old mentor who knew where they needed to concert their efforts to actually get the ball rolling. And one of his first pieces of ancient wisdom was, you need a cool name. It basically went something like, well, it's a box that's made to run DirectX. It's a DirectX box. An X box. From the DirectX name coming from a joke a reporter made shitting on it, to its box with X on it. Xbox naming conventions have always been at the will of the winds, but what the Renegades needed to get that wind under their sails was the ear of a person with pull at Microsoft, who also actually understood what the fuck a video game even was. And of course, the S-tier pick has to be my previously foreshadowed Oshi, Ed Freeze. He was a longtime employee of Microsoft, the successful leader of Microsoft games on PC, and a Bill Gates approved boy toy. But most importantly, he was someone who was already thinking about a potential Microsoft gaming console. So when the Renegades pitched the idea of Xbox to him, a PC disguised as a console that ran on Windows, he was immediately interested. Ed's blood instantly turned green. The DirectX Renegades timing probably couldn't have been better. The green blood thing actually happened, by the way. In an unfortunate manufacturing accident, Ed Freeze got hurt in a way that did draw a little blood, where Bill Gates has been cited as saying, I mean, it's cool, I just didn't expect it to be green. Fearful of the PlayStation 2 turning the PC into hardware gore history, every facet of Microsoft that even slightly frauded with the notion of gaming was force-warped to an all-hands-on-deck meeting. The DirectX team knew that this was the moment they'd been edging for, and came prepared with not just a plan, but a presentation detailing what a Microsoft console could look like. Unbeknownst to them, though, their mothers lied to them, and they were not special. Other teams at Microsoft had also been thinking about what a Microsoft gaming console could look like. Their main rival was a group called Windows CE, a team which had a much longer rap sheet of experience than the DirectX goons. They had experience producing hardware in a way that the Renegades simply didn't. Specifically, folk who had worked on a game console before. That being the failed Panasonic 3DO, but a console nonetheless. They had two very different visions of what a Microsoft game console could be that were in direct opposition with each other. The DirectX Renegades wanted to pursue something freaky, ambitious, and innovative. A PC disguised as a console, literally running Windows. And the Windows CE CE team wanted to do something more traditional, a device truly separate from a PC that would be cheaper to produce, capable of running shit, but less ambitious. And in the end, it would be up to Bill Gates which of these two visions would prevail. The tenured and experienced Windows CE team, or the DirectX renegades. Underdogs with bold new ideas and something to prove, who were chancing it all in the name of those ideas. The decision came down to a pivotal meeting where the two teams would present their pitch in detail to Bill Gates in direct competition of each other, where Bill would then choose whose plan to actually implement. The renegades aimed high. They wanted to stuff a hard drive in the console, a storage unit built into the machine, which had never been done before, on a console, I mean. They also wanted an Ethernet port to be standard in every single Xbox, an incredibly forward-thinking idea for the time. Meanwhile, the Windows CE plan was safe and boring. It was based on console market conventions, and they criticized the DirectX team as not knowing how the console market even worked. Bill Gates didn't seem to be majorly moved in either way, putting this face-off starring Nicolas Cage and John Travolta into a stalemate. The physical thing that broke the tie, though, can best be described as a doohickey. The DirectX team came to the meeting with a machine that kind of looked like a game console, but they had stitched it together from whatever PC parts worked. They were building this thing on the floors of their offices and their cars, the 23rd floor of the North Tower, wherever there was space and time to work on it. This abomination against computer Jesus ran a gutted version of Windows that, importantly, booted up in 4 seconds. Bill had never seen this in his life. He was asking to see it over and over again, like a caveman discovering fire. His mind absolutely set alight like a human Molotov. Crucially, the machine was also running a PlayStation 1 emulator made for Windows. So, the Renegades were able to pull off one more sleight of hand, where they were able to put a PS1 game in the disk drive, and it actually started playing Tomb Raider. It was a successful proof of concept for a console running Windows. The pitch had successfully impressed Bill on multiple levels. He'd never seen Windows like this before, and he was enamored with the concept of Windows in the living room. It was a major step forward. But Bill wasn't the one footing the bill, he'd be the one billing the foot. The fact of the matter is, if they were going to go through with the DirectX team's plan, it would boil down to make a Windows gaming console to get Windows into the living room, and also we need to spend $500 million to make that happen. It makes a man's balls recede a little more inside himself when you frame it like that. So Bill was like, alright, you gotta show this pitch to Steve Ballmer. That was the actual CEO of Microsoft at the time, and they had to get his Twitter opinion thread about it. Bill Gates was very excited at the idea of Xbox, but Steve Ballmer is very much a numbers guy, and if he's gonna spend a bunch of money on something, it better safely make him more back. The Xbox would be a huge undertaking as far as the dollar signs go, and to Steve, it was so far out of Microsoft's usual wheelhouse that it almost didn't seem worth it. But fear is one of God's greatest motivators. The pitch was that the future is in online gaming, that a ubiquitous multimedia machine in the living room is inevitable, and if Microsoft chose to do nothing now, they stood to lose a lot more by letting the future pass them by. So the Xbox gets a tentative green light. You know, like the power button, so it's got a dedicated Microsoft-approved team working on it now. That said, a team needs a leader, one who can balance the equation of power, performance, and price. Making that decision harder was that Microsoft had made its name as a software juggernaut. They weren't really known for birthing their own machines, which painted them as amateurs in hardware manufacturing. So Xbox needed a leader that lended credibility to what Microsoft was trying to do. The Renegades, Steve Ballmer, and several others involved agreed that there was only one real choice of leader, that being one Rick Thompson. Rick ran the relatively small hardware arm of Microsoft successfully, getting the division he was in charge of running up to hundreds of millions of dollars in business a year. Richard recalled in the official Xbox documentary that he was incredibly nervous to take the position, and he didn't feel prepared for such a large undertaking. What might have convinced him to do it, though, is rather funny, as other articles described the presence of a baseball bat. One Steve would apparently smack on his palm during big boy business meetings. Thompson said this to Bloomberg, I'm not big enough for this job. The next day, Ballmer showed up to my office with a baseball bat in his hand, literally, and told me this is what I was going to do. Steve Ballmer's memory of the situation was hazy, but not in disagreement that there may have been a baseball bat present. My neurodivergent king has ADHD, guys. Cut him some slack. Still, even with someone experienced in hardware at the front of this human centipede, Microsoft never intended to manufacture that Xbox on their own. They wanted to partner with a company that was already good at this type of thing. An effort where they got rejected by all sorts of companies. Toshiba, OEM, Dell, all of them. Because console hardware is made at a loss usually, and the games are what makes the money. So why the hell would a hardware company partner with Microsoft to make a console while they make all the money off the games? The idea of starting an entire console division was so terrifying that Microsoft even tried to buy Nintendo instead of doing it themselves at one point. The meeting between them was described by Microsoft as an hour straight of someone laughing at you. So with rejection after rejection, it became clear to the company that they were going to have to design and build this Lego kit on their own. Worse yet, the game plan was going to have to change from the original pitch. Bill Gates was sold on the idea of a PC disguised as a console that ran on Windows to get Windows into the living room. But that idea was proving to be kind of impossible. If you wanted games to run good on the Xbox, you'd have to take Windows out, because the operating system was absolutely gorging itself on the console's limited processing power. So if the team wanted games to run good, they'd have to strip the OS down to its socks, which meant they'd need the source code. Only problem was that the core Windows team was very protective of their software and played I'm taller than you. They just put their hand on the Xbox team's forehead, telling them that they weren't allowed to have the source code.
So we had to steal it. We stole it.
That's real. After they cradle-snatched that infant, they circumcised the poor thing like a good Catholic parent does, until the only recognizable feature of the OS on the Xbox was that it was ran on DirectX. The fallout of this was nothing short of bloody. Fast forward. It is Valentine's Day 2000. The Xbox team, the biggest of wigs like CEO Steve Ballmer and many other major players at Microsoft, are gathered to determine the final word on if Microsoft will full raw dog commit to the Xbox. They're all sitting in this room anxious. Minutes pass. A lot of them, actually. Then suddenly, Bill Gates walks in late, straight molding. He's just read the PowerPoint for that meeting, only to discover that the console described in it is completely different from the concept he'd been sold on. It is the farthest thing from Windows in the living room possible, and is ironically much closer to that Windows CE team's idea of a traditional console, with some major exceptions, but we'll get to that. Bill was eulogizing like a lover scorned or a pastor denouncing porn, apparently saying, "This is a fucking insult to everything I've accomplished at this company." One guy said he needed windshield wipers for his glasses from Bill spitting on them so much from yelling. The shouting wasn't one-sided as it went on, though. People were arguing back and forth, and moreover, many people in that room had dinner plans with their partners that evening. And with how explosive that meeting went, no one would be exploding in someone else that night, in an event that would become known as the Valentine's Day Massacre. The tirades continued back and forth, some defending the plan while Bill was mad at the deception he'd been prey to, until Robbie Bach says, "Fuck it, why not just axe it? We are not convincing each other, so let's just axe it. We haven't announced, we can back out." And it almost got to that point, until fear proved to be the greatest mover of people ever conceived by God again, when some random said, "Well, what about Sony?" The original sin that started it all. Sony is in the living room, Microsoft isn't. Sony wants to supplant the PC in the household, which means supplanting Microsoft. From there, even if it wasn't what Bill had originally been excited for, even if it meant trying something brand new for Microsoft, if not trying meant that the future would leave Microsoft in the dust, it was too much to lose. Gates tells Steve Ballmer, "I think we should do it." Steve describes this as his first big decision as the CEO of Microsoft. And with that sentiment hanging in the air, he agrees to approve the Xbox team's plan and give them everything they asked for. Things moved at dick-calcifying speeds from there, because the reveal of the Xbox was set for GDC 2000, less than a month out from the Valentine's Day Massacre meeting. There was exactly zero idea of what the final console would look like, where Horace Luke had to create the look of the Xbox show prototype in less than a month. Really, the only thing it had to do was look cool and actually run the games. And what Horace came up with was a 40-pound metal X with the word Xbox at the center. It's iconic. You have seen this thing before. It really was just a shell, though. The prototype was made like ergonomics were not a thing. So, like anything Microsoft has made with an X in the name, deadlines existed, and made under the pressure a gun pointed to your head creates, shoving hardware wherever it would fit inside that aluminum cross. It was almost for nothing, too, because on the day of GDC 2000, all three prototype Xboxes failed, with the team scrambling backstage to get them working on time. It was a mad dash to the literal last moment, but finally, with 5,000 developers present, Bill Gates waltzes onto stage and makes the grand reveal of the Xbox. Seamus Blackley of the original 4 Renegades shows up to show off demos on what the Xbox is capable of, and he starts blowing dudes' minds. I can vouch for it too, like the physics. I mean, look at this. An example outside of what they showed here to prove how revolutionary the Xbox would become is that it was the first console to have a game that used the revolutionary technique of deferred shading, a staple in AAA games you play even today. The technical marvel that started it all? Shrek 1 on the Shrek box. Gates described the Xbox as
This is like a PlayStation 2 on steroids.
and it genuinely was the most powerful 6th generation console, at a time where difference in specs was a big selling point in the console wars. Devs were salivating at what they'd be able to do with the capabilities of the Xbox and how many inches of their hairline they'd save in stress because the console ran on DirectX. The reveal, of course, also called for a party and long night of drinking that culminated in 24 members of the Xbox team getting in one elevator, making the thing uncontrollably slide down 4 stories. Several issues remained, but the Xbox was alive and on the verge of thriving. There was just one thing. Marketing didn't want to name it the Xbox. You just don't use code names for the market release. Everybody knows that. Are you crazy? Some of the names that were better than Xbox that apparently should have been used instead of something cringe like a name with X in it include
Norbo,
Zod, Airplug, OG,
Zigzag.
and
they came in with the perfect name. We tested it against the name Xbox, it blows it out of the water. 11X. You know, because it goes to 11. All right, we'll get on Xbox.
the accidental X prevails once again. And Horace Luke, the artisan behind that iconic prototype Giant X, was designing the final Xbox model from scraps, like God figuring out how much of something should actually be made in his image. Horace sketched thousands of ideas of all shapes and sizes. One thing prevailed throughout, though, that being the color of the Xbox, green. It's the signature color of technology ever since the beginning of time, Horace said, when the real reason is that it was the only non-piss-colored option that other major consoles hadn't already called dibs on. The original Xbox ended up being fat as shit. It was still smaller than a PC, but it was rocking stock PC parts that took up a lot more room than the custom hardware Sony and Nintendo were using in their machines. The final look of the console was revealed by Bill Gates at CES 2001, but this time he was joined by his spiritual twin, The Rock. And it was to surprising effectiveness. Seriously, I could see these two hosting a podcast you don't know the name of, but see clipped to death on TikTok. So yeah, the Xbox is cool and all, but what a console really needs is games. That's the whole point of these plastic boxes. You open smaller plastic box, take disc out of it, put it in big plastic box, now it plays it. Xbox was on a time limit though, and they didn't have time to make the games from scratch. So they set out on a 100-city-wide world tour looking for in-development games that would be willing to launch on the Xbox. And the chance for the team to show the fruits of their labor and prove it was a place for real gamers to really game was at GameStock 2001. They revealed a slate of titles across genres, unveiled several partnerships, and had some very key surprises. That being the end credit scene that had people contracting rabies, foaming from their mouths the hardest, the showing of Halo.
And that's it for our show today. I hope you got to see everything that you wanted. Did you see everything? Oh, I feel like I am forgetting something. What was it? Oh, Halo. How could I forget Halo?
Microsoft's choice to buy the game's developer Bungie, specifically for Halo, was a ballsy one. Xbox and Bungie were just like Bill and Dwayne. Twinsies, renegades. Unfortunately, Bungie's bank account was in the mud after they shat the bed on a previous game, Myth 2. That game had a glitch that, when it was uninstalled, could end up eradicating other files on a person's computer as well, and by the time this cognito hazard was discovered, 200,000 units of Myth 2 had already been shipped. Still, Bungie did the right thing and recalled every copy to fix the bug, costing them something like $800,000, which put them in financial peril. Microsoft eventually bailed them out and got their hands on Halo, but by the time Bungie landed at their new home, Halo was barely even a game. Former Bungie staff even said that they didn't even start figuring out what Halo really was until they got to Microsoft. During development, the game went from something like a real-time strategy game closer to those Myth games to a third-person shooter, and finally, at Microsoft, into a first-person shooter. All at a time where FPS games were viewed as a very much a PC genre, and playing an FPS with a controller was just seen as a shittier experience across the board. And Microsoft was centering the future of the Xbox around Halo. This game, with all the odds stacked against it, as the killer title for the untested and unproven Xbox. Microsoft's only real course of action to address all this was obvious. Prove it. E3 2001 rolls around, and it's Microsoft's last big showing before the Xbox's November launch, so they have to make an impression. And they certainly made one. Robbie Bach walks up on stage to a crowd of gaming critics and journalists. He's hyping up the Xbox and saying it's gonna go crazy and how hard they've worked to make this dream a reality. And then when he pushes the power button to demonstrate what booting up will all look like, the Xbox doesn't turn on.
And in fact, if I press this little button here on the front,
and then I, hit the magic button that's supposed to start the Xbox,
you'll see Xbox will actually start up. We can bring that video up. We can bring that video up.
nothing happened.
Well, if we could bring the video up, Xbox would be live and starting and running.
Just Except not even a fart noise because nothing happened. The rest of E3 doesn't get any better. This was the media's first time getting their hands on the Xbox, and more importantly, getting to play Halo. The issue was, the Xbox was a little over half a year from launch, and the hardware inside it was still a work-in-progress fanfiction, as in, not done. The machines that Xbox demoed at E3 2001 were severely underpowered compared to what it was supposed to be capable of at launch. The poor performance made Halo the console's flagship title that everybody had been cheesing over but was still skeptical over the practicality of, ran like a slideshow at its 2001 E3 debut. The showing made people afraid that Xbox was going to crash and burn in one of the biggest ways possible. Many years later, Peter Moore, then president of Sega of America, revealed that all of Sega's internal testings basically said that the chances for the Xbox's success were so low, if you found one in hell, you'd basically won the lottery because it should be lower than that. EA president Larry Propt said Xbox was on a death march. Speaking of crashing and burning, 9/11. Unironically, the towers getting nay-nayed out of existence had a material effect on the console's launch. The OG Xbox's big launch event was meant to take place in Times Square only 2 months after the tragedy, but was put in limbo as a result. It was only thanks to Rudy Giuliani, back when he was the mayor of New York and still capable of stopping his snot from leaking out his nose involuntarily, asking Xbox to still go through with the launch to show the city's resilience that ensured it would continue as planned. And even then, it might have still ended up bombing in a much more boring way than 9/11. What if nobody showed up? Whatever the vibes were that night seemed like they might forecast the trajectory of Xbox as a brand forever. No matter the trepidation though, time always marches on, and November 15th, 2001 comes knocking, where the Times Square event of Xbox comes to town. Every screen in the square is repping that Xbox logo. Not just that, but also anywhere a product exists. Xbox branded food, drinks, diapers so people can shit and piss without leaving the lines, and Christ, the lines were long, because yeah, people showed up alright. As the night ran on, the walls of buildings reflected the glowing lights of the Xbox logo, painting that town green. Bill Gates was there, like he had been at every Xbox event prior. Unfortunately, no school shooter fit this time on account of the political climate, but he was there to hand over the very first Xbox ever sold. Despite all the trials and tribulations, Xbox made it to market, and the energy at its launch was electric. It was a moment in culture, but moments are just that, temporary. And the true test of longevity is if the momentum from a moment carries on to an era. Halo's troubled development was another in a long line of balls-to-the-wall crunch that seems to happen with everything that has an X in the name at Microsoft. The demos that people had gotten their hands on were lackluster and underperforming. Halo was met with skepticism on if an FPS could work on a console, not just as well as it did on a PC, but also well enough to carry a brand new gaming machine as its premier title. I probably don't need to tell you this, but turns out, yes, on all fronts. Halo was the game everybody wanted to at least try when they got on Xbox, and when they played it, turns out they were in for roughly 10 to 12 hours of unfiltered peak. Minus that Flood Temple level, shit still stinks. But Halo was best in class in pretty much every category possible to categorize. As far as iconography, Master Chief is the literal coolest guy ever, and he's green like the Xbox! I guess I'm green like the Xbox too right now. He became a gaming icon almost instantly, and his impact was strong enough that he still is today, even though Halo has been in dire straits in recent years. Getting to step in the Chief's shoes was an unmatched rush of dopamine that holds up even if you play that game for the first time in current year, trademark. The scenery and design of the Halo ring and its game world was breathtaking and probably one of the best looking games you could have played at the time. The mechanics were genuinely groundbreaking. Up to that point, first-person shooters on console didn't have that common controller language that could be translated easily from one game to the next. But Halo's controller layout was so good that it practically canonized it in FPS's single-handedly. The control scheme in the original Halo is the basis for every modern first-person shooter you've played even now. Even among the wider genre of first-person shooters, Halo was a more open-world game at a time where tight corridors were all the rage. Halo was innovative in so many ways that I can't list all of them here, but the real lasting memories of that game for many people was the late nights they spent up mastering they Chiefs. together. Multiplayer on Halo was huge and one of a kind. Not only could you play locally on split screen with your friends, both on co-op and PvP, but in this game originated the mass adoption of one of gaming's most sacred traditions, the LAN party. The inclusion of an Ethernet orifice in every Xbox meant that you and your friends could bring your consoles to the homie's house and link all of them together in game lobbies with sizes previously unfathomable to a simpleton console gamer. 4v4 multiplayer had existed on PC for some time, but Halo and the Xbox were perhaps the first time many people would spend nights at their friend's house, up late, unblinking, and degrading their retinas to get in just one more game. Halo made the Xbox in more ways than one, and was a big part of making gaming a more social and community-driven experience than it ever had been, an attribute that Xbox would be leading the charge on for years to come.
Look at this little dork just chilling, playing video games upside down like he can tell what's happening on the monitor. Some might say he's living life, which I suppose is apt because the Xbox lives!
For all you new-gen Discord server denizens that take online gaming for granted, you might not know that Xbox Live actually wasn't ready for the launch of the OG Xbox back in 2001. The story of its conception is like many others at Microsoft, one of internal struggle where it's a miracle it got done at all. It was hodgepodge together on a bet and a dream where the only winnings were proving the idea of Xbox Live could work at all. The man leading the charge was Jay Allard. Yes, he had a one-letter first name. That is really the most game developer shit I've ever seen. Like, okay, N from Pokemon. In the 90s, Allard first came to Bill Gates' attention by emailing him saying that the internet was the next big thing, and that Windows 95 should be able to access the web off the shelf. Gates agreed with him, and Allard's prediction paid off in dividends. His idea of Xbox Live hinged on two things. One was having a local hard drive built into the Xbox, and two was Allard's biggest gamble on the machine, fighting for the inclusion of broadband Ethernet in every single Xbox. At the time, most of Bill Clinton's America only had dial-up. For all you young cats who didn't grow up with this, aka me, you think I knew what this stuff was before I googled it when I was 12? It's basically that annoying screeching sound your favorite YouTuber uses in their videos when trying to represent internet as being slow. It was basically internet ran through a home line, and you literally had to make a phone call to use the internet. But while you were using the internet, nobody was able to make a phone call. On the other hand, broadband was much faster, but not very popular on the consumer playground yet, because it meant wiring a whole new connection into your house. But despite this, Allard decided to include an Ethernet gash in every Xbox anyways. Bill Gates liked the idea of a console that connected to the internet, but he had performance anxiety about the big dick swing they were taking on broadband, an opinion a lot of people at Microsoft shared. The inclusion of an Ethernet orifice was cited as the most controversial choice made during the original Xbox's development. Many on the team were afraid it would be the death of the machine, a reputation that didn't earn the Xbox Live team a lot of friends around the water cooler. But the Xbox wasn't trying to compete with the octogenarians of the day, but rather the game boxes of the future. Jay Allard himself said, "If I needed to pick an introductory quote for the history of Xbox, I'd choose the following words spoken by Gandhi." I'm sure he'd love his words being used for the Xbox here. First, they ignore you. Then, they laugh at you. Then, they fight you. Then, you win. Like all of the Xbox dev team, the Xbox Live crew saw themselves as taking a big risk at Microsoft by choosing to work on the console instead of other safer positions at the company, betting on the future to try and make something new and revolutionary happen. And while, yes, Xbox Live was putting stock in the future, a little insider trading never hurt anyone, the team decided to help along the process of broadband expanding by going directly to broadband companies, where they pitched the idea and potential of Xbox Live to them. And at the time not so big, broadband were eager to get in. Some made plans to bundle Xbox Live access with the purchase of a broadband connection, while others even made special exceptions for Xbox Live to not throttle its connection. Throttling is when your ISP makes your internet slower on purpose, which they love doing. Giving this special birthday boy treatment to Xbox could make it seem like it ran smoother than other things on broadband. Even still, the Ethernet fissure in the Xbox remained a contentious topic at Microsoft. In August 2000, Boyd Molterer was hired on as the dev manager for Xbox Live, and under him, the Xbox Live crew tried to keep their heads low. They were already getting mean-mugged left and right at the office, so they didn't want to add to the reputation they had as the potential bane of Xbox's existence. The concept of Xbox Live largely bit its whole flow from the 1992 novel Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson. The book was written at a time long before mass social media and described a vast interconnected virtual world, an idea that fascinated Jay Allard ever since he first read it. Molterer even credits the book for inspiring most of Xbox Xbox Live's original features. Allard was handing out copies of the book to the team like candy, telling them, okay, so basically do this. He was such a dork about it, man. The main character's name was Hero Protagonist, and Allard decided, yeah, he's literally me. That's my gamer tag now.
A gamer tag is Hero Protagonist.
Which, yeah, it was that. From the jump, Xbox Live was envisioned as a unified service across all games on the console. The team adopted a Disney World, not Coney Island mentality during development, where Disney World is a complex and interconnected experience that strives for immersive and seamless presentation, and Coney Island is a shithole with used condoms every 300 feet. Not gonna lie, I prefer it there more. The giant rats at Coney are better company than the single giant mouse breathing down your neck at Disney. Allard and the Xbox leadership team established 7 pillars of what Xbox Live had to embody: safety, consistency, accountability, simplicity, flexibility, fairness, and value. This is to say, Xbox Live had to be a streamlined experience that worked without flaw on the regular, so people would keep coming back. These values have aged. Online gaming like this had really only existed on the PC up till now, and many of the devs working on Xbox Live had experience there, so they knew all too well the pitfalls of online gaming. To pull this off on a console, safeguards would have to exist much more strongly. Hackers and cheaters had an easy time fucking up the function for folk on PC, so Xbox Live had to be able to shut them out when they stuck their head in. That way those same shit stains didn't skid all over the surface, just hurting the experience. Another huge factor in Xbox Live's feature set and development was doing basically whatever Bungie said it wanted. Bungie shared the same vision of revolutionizing online gaming that Jay Allard did, but they hadn't been able to act on it with the first Halo game. As Halo 1 got further in its development, the game became more and more single-player focused, with multiplayer only having a working build just a few weeks before its launch. It had succeeded as the Xbox's killer app, but it was released a year before Xbox Live would be ready, with no support built in for online play. The idea of Xbox Live launching without support for the console's biggest multiplayer offering was scary, and by then, Bungie was already making Halo 2, so they didn't have time to add online support to Halo Combat Evolved. The idea of letting a team outside Bungie add long-distance teabagging to the game was floated, but Bungie said, touch my baby and I'll give you rabies, refusing to let anyone else handle their source code. This set in stone that Xbox Live was not getting a Halo game on it until Halo 2, and God knows how many years later. Thanks to this though, Halo 2's multiplayer could be built around online play from the ground up. So, Bungie's plans got stupidly ambitious. Like a 16 times zoom on a sniper rifle could not begin to describe the level of scope creep. And the success of Halo 1 got Bungie a lot of good kitten points with Microsoft, so the company was all the way on board with whatever crackhead shit Bungie wanted to do. Their laundry list of demands is stuff that is considered bog standard in online gaming today. Stuff like seamless matchmaking, accessible friends lists, clans, in-game messaging, parties, party chat, dispute arbitration, moderation, host migration. A bunch of these being things that the Xbox Live team hadn't even considered until Bungie told them, hey, do this. That's not even close to the full list of things they wanted to do. Some features had to be cut due to time constraints and the limitations of the Xbox, and Bungie didn't get to act on a lot of them until Halo 3 or even later. Their input was super useful, but implementing a lot of these features that Bungie wanted would mean having to pull people away from their pet projects to work on Bungie's thing instead, which did not make everybody love them. For Halo 2 to be everything Bungie wanted it to be, Xbox Live would need to have all its skin ripped off and replaced with crocodile leather in order to add Bungie's wish list of features. And how good could a feature list be if it doesn't even have J. Cole in there? Come on! Sure, compromises had to be made between what Bungie wanted and the Xbox Live engineering team wanted, but unfortunately for the latter, Halo 2 almost always got picked as the favorite child by top brass, which led to even more butthurt aimed at Bungie from other parts of Xbox Live. Still, Bungie got what they wanted because they were seen as the visionaries in the process, and it was reasoned that what they wanted to do with Xbox Live could end up benefiting every other game that used the service. The changes made to Live for the sake of Halo 2 had an influence on online gaming that is hard to overstate. You could say that this time around, the game changed the gaming. Xbox Live first started official testing in spring 2002. Kits were given to Microsoft employees first, bundled with the racing game Revolt, picked because it was deemed enough of a stupid baby game that players wouldn't feel like they had to relearn games all over again just to play them online. These test kits came complete with all you would need for voice chat, and these early test sessions might be the first instances of an experience a lot of us know very well. Staying up way too late into the hours of the AM and just shooting the shit with your buddies from all across the world.
You know, it is a good day to die, cheesemaker.
This magic is fairly common today, but the ones who first got to play Xbox Live said that the feeling of bed rotting in a flyover state while playing with their buddy in Japan made them realize, holy shit, this is gonna work. More beta kits gradually rolled out, and around the 15,000 unit mark, Jay Allard recalled a moment where he was playing the stupid baby game Revolt, and he was gobsmacked when he encountered the unthinkable. He heard a woman speak on voice chat on purpose. It was some kid's mom, no less, just chatting with strangers while her son played the game. It was a genuine moment where the family came together to play with strangers the world over, something they'd never do in real life. It was an echo of the reality that Allard had dreamed of ever since first reading Snow Crash. Xbox Live officially launched in November 2002 with another big-ass party, because of course it did. This time in Hollywood, with the likes of Freddie Prinze Jr. and Sam Jackson showing up. The number of users at launch was so much bigger than every figure Microsoft had predicted that motherfuckers thought the reporting software was broken when they saw it. And despite getting a shit ton more traffic than expected, the Xbox Live servers seemed to keep stable the whole time. It was genuinely just going great for them. Still, in the absence of Halo, the one thing Xbox Live needed now was its own killer app. And the thing that Microsoft saw as most important was EA Sports. To quote, EA had to be on Live or Live would fail. The issue was EA did not like the idea of Xbox owning the online service every game had to use. This was an issue a lot of studios had. Many publishers had their own online servers for their own games where they got to own their customers' information, and they did not want to hand over that resource to Microsoft. Over time, when they saw the success, most of them fell in line, but EA was perhaps the longest major holdout. It got to a point where some at Microsoft thought that they should just cut a deal and make an exception for EA, but Allard and Bach told them that every game needed to be on Xbox Live for online services. And if EA didn't want to play ball and let people play their games about balls on Xbox Live, then EA could eat their balls. What eventually burst the dam was EA struggling to get their PS2 online service to catch on. Meanwhile, Xbox Live had only gotten beefier because of its broadband capabilities, leaving that competition in the dust. For Xbox side, Microsoft made a football game called Fever, because I mean, Xbox Live has to have a football game on it, right? But really no one gave a fuck about playing it. So EA came crawling back and made a deal. One that was basically just giving Xbox everything they wanted. Look, we'll do Xbox Live. Just kill Fever and you can have Madden. Basically perfect for Microsoft because Fever only existed because Xbox didn't have Madden. Every developer of Fever was shortly euthanized, having outlived their usefulness. EA and Microsoft formally announced their partnership at E3 2004, and Muhammad Ali was there. In a Tumblr, Obama was there, everybody clapped kind of way, except this time it was real, I guess. Now, when the launch of Halo 2 finally came later in 2004, it was, something. Xbox Live's previous record for concurrent players was 40,000. When Halo 2 went online, that record was more than quadrupled. And even still, the servers were just locked the fuck in and able to handle everything thrown at them. All in all, the original Xbox Live was a resounding success, and Microsoft was riding that high. Peter Moore, former Sega of America president turned top Xbox executive, started a chant of Xbox Live! Xbox Live! During a meeting that Microsoft CEO Steve Ballmer was at. Mr. Moore was slamming the table so hard he accidentally broke a conference phone in front of his boss. Live successfully took the decentralized responsibility of companies needing to make their own servers for their own games and brought it all under one banner, pioneering almost every facet of online gaming that we enjoy today. Like, tell me if these sound familiar to you. A single username or gamer tag used across all of your games. A friends list that you would add people across games with and could invite them to different games using. And a voice chat that let you socialize with others while you were playing with them. These features basically transformed multiplayer gaming from a thing you physically did next to someone into a long-distance activity that appealed across any dynamic of people. Microsoft said a major influence when focus group testing for Live was when a test subject said that gaming to them was grabbing a six-pack, inviting over the boys, and playing FIFA. Microsoft then asked the subject, what happens when you graduate from university? Where the guinea pig's response was, oh. And ever since Live was launched, college friendships after graduation have never petered off into nothing ever again. There's this idea of a third place. It's basically the location you go to hang out with the homies that isn't home or work. Say maybe a bar or a gym or a library if you're a dork. Well, Halo 2 specifically was some people's first experience with a virtual third place, which is basically taking that same third place experience and putting it online. One of the Xbox Live developers shared an anecdote of a screenwriter they knew, who said that Halo 2 lobbies Hobbies for the better part of 2 years was the place to go if you wanted to chat with other writers about workshopping Hollywood screenplays. Just talk and shop while doing something recreational together. YouTubers engage in a similar practice, except it's usually on Roblox Sonic Speed Simulator. Halo 2's connection as a game with some people is so strong that when access to the original Xbox Live was shut off on April 15th, 2010, several players who hadn't logged out of Halo 2 before online support was sunset, forcing them to keep up the Xbox Live servers until the last of them had to log on. They were the last holdouts, and it earned them recognition from people at Xbox themselves. The original iteration of Xbox really was something special. It was the first of its kind, but it was incomplete. The rest of the competition was stuck playing catch-up to it, but Xbox Live could still be more. It could make that gap even wider. And thinking about that, the next generation was just over the horizon.
Making anything worth making is like a house of cards. Sometimes it topples over and then you punch it on purpose when you're mad.
Making a new console for the first time is hard, and then finishing that and deciding, haha, again, requires taking everything you learned from the first run, taking some more knowledge that you don't have, and then using all that to try and make an even better console the next time around. So, coming off the OG Xbox, what exactly was Microsoft working with? Well, it was a miracle the original Xbox made it out the door at all, coming together in a breakneck dev cycle of just 20 months, where even then, the folk who worked on it weren't sure there was even an appetite for the machine. Thankfully, people did show up, by the boatload, with the Xbox selling over 1 million units in its first 3 weeks.
What is bro looking at?
By the time the 6th console generation ended, the Xbox had even managed to claw its way to second place, surpassing the Nintendo GameCube in sales and hitting 10.1 million North American sales by July 2004. It even managed to gain a full third of the US console market. For its part, Halo essentially created a new gaming icon overnight, and the double penetration of Halo 2 and Xbox Live gave Microsoft a leg up going into the next generation that was set to revolve around online gaming. This did all come at a cost, though, literally. Despite the high sales, sources say that Microsoft burned $3.7 billion on Xbox by 2005. For every Xbox sold at $299, outside analysts estimated that Microsoft lost $125 per unit, which is pretty bad. Inside sources, though, said Microsoft lost $168 for every unit sold, which is better. Ed Freeze framed this as not a $4 billion loss, but more of a $4 billion investment in the Xbox brand to get a foothold in the market. But contrary to that, when the Xbox launched in Times Square, it was supposed to disrupt the Japanese hegemony of the gaming industry, only to do fuck all sales in Japan itself. Microsoft hoped to sell 6 million of the things in Japan by June 2002, only managing 500,000 by the end of the console's life. It was the Manhattan Project that never left Manhattan. And more broadly, as the 7th console generation came closer, console games were getting more expensive to develop while being sold for less. And as games got more expensive to make, it required more people to make them, with the individuals tasked with birthing a video game pushed to a further inhuman level of crunch. An infamous letter at the time came from the wife of an EA developer absolutely violating the industry for the way it treated its developers and the hell it put them through. Like we saw in the development of the Xbox and DirectX before it, people sacrificed time with their families to make these things happen. And relative success or not, Xbox was still the underdog. The PlayStation 2 was the undisputed winner that generation, selling over 100 million units by the end of its tenure and controlling more of the market globally than Nintendo and Microsoft combined. To many, the Xbox was a black hole of capital fighting an uphill battle, but the hill is actually Mount Everest. Still, despite it all, Microsoft still got their foot in the door, and in more ways than one, they were ahead of the curve, and they were keen on capitalizing on every advantage they had. They'd need it for the next generation if they wanted to stand a chance. God conceived the sequel to the Xbox as a sperm in his ballsack almost immediately after the first Xbox launched. As early as June 2002, Steve Ballmer was describing a machine that had internet connectivity built in, but by then it was still only whispers with no solid plan. Mysteriously, later that year in October, in the Xbox team's internal newsletter called X in the City, information on what the next machine was going to be started getting teased. At this point, the new console was only called the Xenon, a codename so cliquey and socially anxious it wasn't even to be repeated in other parts of Microsoft. At the time, most of the Xbox staff was busy shitting themselves stressing while trying to get Xbox Live launched successfully. Well, November comes and goes, and Live's launch is comparable to the best sex you've ever had. So trying to chase that high again, and with more time on the Xbox team's hands, the Xenon got bumped up on the priority list. Much of its development was informed by what made Xbox Live PS5 hit the way it did. And finally, in December 2002, Jay Allard starts forming a cabal of official planners to start envisioning what exactly the Xenon would be. Fast forward, it's the next year. In February 2003, things are starting to come together. The upper echelon of the Xbox butt buddies decide, let's do something expensive, per usual, with the executive team meeting at the Salish Lodge and Spa near Snoqualmie Falls. This was where the opening of Show for Cool People Twin Peaks was filmed. For cool people. Xbox is cool, right? So they fit right in. As the minds decided to meet and touch each other's meat, what resulted from that trip outside of our tax bracket came to be known as the 330-300 plan. Each of these numbers matters, so let's walk through it step by step, starting with the one I can actually count to, 3. Robbie Bach writes a 3-page memo about what the Xenon should be in the broadest of strokes, as well as the reasoning behind each brush. 1. The original Xbox was made with existing PC parts and sold at a loss on every unit. And since Microsoft didn't own the designs for the parts they used, it was hard to make console production cheaper over time. This time around, Robbie wants Microsoft to design, produce, and own the chips used in the Xenon themselves. That way, they could optimize the design to break even on every unit sold and make the console cheaper to produce as the years went on. 2. Rumor had it that Sony had been working on the processor for the PlayStation 3 as far back as 2001. Based on Sony's current process, predictions were that they could get to the console market as soon as November 2005. So Robbie wanted to at least get to market at the same time as Sony, if not beat them there, in order to avoid the almost 2-year head start that the PlayStation 2 had on the original Xbox. Launching in 2005 would give the OG Xbox a very short 4-year console lifecycle, but because Microsoft was losing so much money on every machine they sold, that spending a lot of cash to make a new thing that doesn't bleed money felt like it wouldn't be such a bad thing. A global launch was also touted. Microsoft had tried and failed to launch worldwide at the same time with the original Xbox, which left regions like Europe, who did actually buy the console, feeling like the unloved middle child because America got everything first. It was going to be hard to pull off, but if Microsoft could manage it, that it would feel less like they were playing favorites with different markets. And 3, Robbie just wanted what they were doing to matter, man. He wanted Xbox Live to be built into every console, to have it as a signature. He wanted to control 40% of the console market, and ultimately to just make the Xbox business profitable. Robbie sent that 3-page memo to Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer on April 2nd, 2003, and it got approved. Next up, it was Jay Allard's job to turn those 3 pages into something more detailed. He was tasked with writing a 30-page plan that was dubbed XE30. This is where Piccolo got his whole flow from, yes.
30 on 30.
Most of the work for XE30 was done during the summer of 2003, and there were a lot of cooks in the kitchen. But the common trait among all of them was that they were all diehards, working tirelessly to create something great. They were piecing this plan together like plastic surgeons reconstructing a patient's mangled face. And because of all their hard work, the first version of XE30 was dog shit. Allegedly. Executives who read the thing criticized the plan as a sprawling mess and a terrible pitch for a product. It apparently looked like it was written by a tweaker or like a commentary video script. What's the difference, really? It had a general lack of focus and was filled with rants on the state of the gaming industry, like the rising costs of making games and the workload it put on developers, which thankfully is a completely solved issue today. Allard's plan did try to address these issues by playing into the Xbox brand's strengths as a developer-friendly platform, but apparently it lacked the sauce of something next generation. Dean Takahashi called that original version of XE30 a, quote, product of a schizophrenic business strategy. It was described as spending money to try and get more market share in gaming, which didn't align with the early principle of trying not to lose money on every console sold and making the brand profitable in the first place. It was just generally seen as really at odds with itself. The plan got sent back to be reworked, and getting to the final version of XE30 was a grueling, probably really annoying iterative process. People working on the document had to scrap with executives on the regular. Several features that were well ahead of their time got initially rejected. Like, for Christ's sake, at one point it was considered too expensive to put Wi-Fi in the console. Leadership had to be convinced that a lot of the stuff they voted off the island was actually cool and awesome and should be in the Xenon. And despite XE30's intention of being a comprehensive plan of action, some things just never got ironed out in writing. Things like the lineup of launch games were simply impossible to know ahead of time because of how much could change during a game's development. It took 6 months of rewrites, reworks, and re-upping on RRoD, but through the noise, a song started making itself heard, and the core details of the Xenon became solidified. This was going to be an HD console with a widescreen 720p resolution. The goal was to make games as accessible as possible. You shouldn't need a hard drive to play games. Controls should translate across titles. If a button makes you jump in one game, it should probably make you jump in a different game, further unifying the language of gaming in one nation under Microsoft. And core to this idea of unity was every game having Xbox Live enabled. Players should have a hard time telling the difference between single-player and multiplayer experiences, both co-op and PvP. There was to be both a free and premium version of Xbox Live, where the free one just does fuck all because you couldn't play online with it. The new Xbox Live Marketplace was conceptualized here, where you could play demos of games for free and then conveniently buy and digitally download those games to your console if you liked them. All in all, the console was meant to make gaming easy as shit to get into, where the gamer themselves was at the center of the equation. The Xenon at every vector should put the power in the player's hands to meet their wants and needs, and to let the player express themselves through their console. This idea of centering everything around the player is where the name of the Xbox 360 first came to be. By the end of it all, XE30, meant to be 30 pages, nearly tripled in size to 80 when it was all done, where at the very end of the plan, Jay Allard included a little something something. A fake article in a fake magazine that posited a fake future where everything in XE30 went exactly as planned. A world where the Xbox 360 was universally praised as the future of gaming. He wrote literal AU fanfiction where everything turned out alright for him. By October 2003, XE30 was finally ready to be presented to Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer and got approved to move forward. Now the 300 part of the 330-300 thing, yeah, that was literally everything else. Everybody doing the actual stuff to make the console an actual thing. Designing the console's look was a process itself. The original Xbox was seen as fat and ugly and dumb, especially to Eastern audiences, and was basically just a box made to fit whatever needed to be stuffed inside of it. The Xbox 360, though, was designed to be pretty to look at. Where the original Xbox looked like it was about to explode, the Xbox 360 looked like it was inhaling. It was basically the reverse process of the OG Xbox, where the shell was being made before what was actually going to be inside it was finished. But with the 360, they didn't just want a look, they wanted a brand for the console, one that conveyed the player was at the center of it all. And from that ethos, the console's signature was born. The iconic rings of green light that indicate how many controllers are connected to the middle. These lights all surrounding the power button. The player has the power literally at the center of it all. Why did I highlight that part of the script? Does something happen? Microsoft wanted to sell the 360 for a higher than usual price of $399. That way it would be easier to make a profit on each unit sold, and it created financial wiggle room to use more expensive parts while still breaking even. And that wiggle room sure got wiggled in because the console's insides were still far from settled at this point. Shout out to robot fuckers. Namely, that goal I mentioned earlier about how a gamer shouldn't need a hard drive to game the games. There were fights internally on if the 360 should have the hard drive built in like the original did. Ed Freeze was a major proponent of it for the sake of better gaming, trademark, but because of the added costs, he was facing major backlash from on high. The compromise was a two-pronged solution, where a premium Xbox 360 would be sold with a hard drive and a cheaper model sold without one, but that 360 could later have a hard drive connected to it. Several developers were not happy about this, and they were afraid that studios might have to be forced to target lower performance for games to run on the cheaper model. Thankfully, a thing that has never happened since, but one major battle that devs won was when Tim Sweeney managed to convince Microsoft to double the amount of RAM inside the Xbox, taking it from 256 megabytes to 512. This was a yes given to a pretty please request, which cost Microsoft an extra $1 billion by the end. Another important decision was making DVD the format that 360 games ran off of. This did cut down on costs compared to Sony's new Blu-ray format or the Blu-ray competitor HD DVDs, which, by the way, are just so fucking awesome. I love HD DVDs, dude. But Microsoft decided that the time wasn't right for God's chosen format, and normal DVD-sized DVDs were gonna have to suffice, which unfortunately meant that if a developer's game was too big for a single disc, a second DVD would be needed included in the game case. It's very clearly divine punishment for Microsoft's hubris, shirking the mandate of heaven. Some people wanted engineers reassigned so they could make the 360 backwards compatible with games like Halo 2 because of just how many people played that multiplayer. And though this did did piss off certain bigwigs like Jay Allard, this was eventually achieved with certain games through emulation. But what's core to creating a console is figuring out what that core literally is, the hardware inside. And Microsoft's mission to create their own chips to keep costs down was a complex one. Sony was playing Saddam and trying to keep the specifics of their products hush-hush. And no matter what those details were, Microsoft was going to be playing catch-up, having started 2 years after Sony had. As a result, if any parts were completed late, it would cause major shortages in the supply, which is a problem when you're launching with a potential customer base of the entire fucking world. A group at Microsoft, led by the Web TV team, the same group of folk who wrestled with the Renegades to control the vision of the original Xbox, took charge themselves of designing a chip and decided to work with partner companies to actually manufacture those chips. The partner companies chosen to help create the Xbox 360's processor and graphics chip were IBM and ATI respectively. Both came with unique baggage. With IBM, there was one major issue. You see, since 2001, IBM had been one of Sony's partners that were up to their nipples involved with developing the cell processor for the PS3. They were now playing both sides of a console war, and even worse, it was with Sony's arch nemesis, white dudes from Seattle. Taking that contract with Microsoft might seem ballsy to you and me. It was. But dollar signs don't lie, and rejecting Microsoft's offer would mean IBM passing up on $1 billion worth of chips. Even if IBM was double dipping to get double dough, though, Microsoft's deadlines were still incredibly tight. They required developing and manufacturing a chip in less than 24 months, an absurdly short amount of time to complete that process. This was not going to get done with regular old engineering. It was time for some awesome engineering. You see, IBM makes chips and stuff for big business boys, from servers to TVs, so it was always understood that part of the long-term plan was for IBM to use the PS3's cell processor and other products for other clients. The same with Toshiba, who was also helping design the chip with Sony. It was right there in the contract. That's how it was supposed to go. What Sony did not expect was for IBM to do that before the processor was done. So one day, someone at IBM had a giga-shit brain blast and realized, hey, you know, the Xbox 360 is technically another product from another client. There was nothing that prevented them from reusing their work on the PS3 to build a processor for the 360. In effect, money that Sony paid to IBM to develop the PS3 ended up funding the development of the Xbox right under their noses. I should define my terms. Awesome engineering is when you do something that feels illegal, but not enough to get you fired. The stories of IBM developing these chips in the same building are hysterical. Just testing chips for the 360 and PS3 only a few floors away from each other. Employees in cubicles right next to each other having to hide that they were developing products for two direct competitors. It was like when Drake and Josh invited two different girls to prom and did everything they could to stop the two girls from meeting each other at the function. Some internally at IBM thought the whole thing was scummy, and it was only made worse by the fact that IBM was also developing a separate chip for the Nintendo Wii. Like, I want you to imagine being an employee at IBM. You're just riding the elevator for fun, as is America's favorite pastime. Then you see the elevator doors open to a room filled with reps from both Sony and Microsoft, standing next to a sign that basically says, no talking about secret stuff here. Yeah, well, that actually happened to someone. If this was a Drake and Josh episode, a children's laugh track would be playing. But children aren't allowed in the offices, and Drake is not allowed near children. Regardless, the Xbox 360's chip was codenamed Water Noose, like after the Monsters, Inc. character for some fucking reason. And in IBM's mad dash racing against themselves, I guess, they managed to pull off their little heist and delivered both the PS3 and Xbox 360's chips on time. IBM delivered the 360 chip at the same time as the PS3, despite only having 11 months to do so, in large part thanks to awesome engineering. When you're trying to compare the two, the gist is basically this. The cell processor was, by all accounts, fucking weird. The Air Force actually used PS3s to do the Saddam Hussein PS2 supercomputer meme, but for real. But the processor itself was expensive to manufacture and hard to make games for. Meanwhile, Water Noose was less powerful, but still very capable and a much more conventional processor. And this was right in line with the Xbox 360's goal of being cheap to make and easy for developers to make games on. The chip's accessibility actually gave Xbox a huge head start with developers. Sony's chip was so weird and freaky that it had no similar hardware that devs could start building their games on, while Microsoft's chip ironically resembled processors being used on certain Apple Mac computers of all things. Those two were lookalikes in the way people in Universe pretend that Shadow looks like Sonic.
Whoa!
So in a weird bizarro world scene, a bunch of Macs got shipped to Microsoft headquarters. That way they could start developing games for the 360. Meanwhile, Sony was on their third try on making a working graphics chip for the PS3. Their first version was just too big. The second was just another cell processor, and it failed. And for the third, they just had to commission NVIDIA to do a last-minute design. Turns out that not knowing what's inside a console makes it hard to make games for. Who would have guessed? For ATI's end, their work on the graphics chip for the 360 was under similar time constraints as IBM's processor, and they similarly had to keep the Microsoft malarkey they were up to hush-hush. By now, Microsoft had fully committed to that grand ambition of launching on holiday 2005 in 3 markets worldwide: the US, Europe, and Japan, which would require 3 million console units produced by fall 2005. To meet that production schedule, ATI needed to complete the first prototype of their graphics chip by fall 2004. In other words, ATI had the same deadlines as IBM and were expected to reach them with only half the manpower. IBM finished their first prototype in August 2004. ATI didn't hit that milestone until November. Eagle-eyed viewers may notice that November is later than August. Only 6 weeks after the first prototype was made, and ATI's graphics cards just kept crashing, which forced a lot of the already tiny team to focus on putting out metaphorical fires whenever they sparked up, instead of moving to the next phase of literal production. Even better, they wouldn't know if their fixes even worked until the next iteration of the chip's design was produced in the factory. So they were flying blind and praying to RNGesus between every round of changes, forced to play the waiting game in the meantime. In December 2004, IBM is already starting to spit chips out of its factories, and Xbox 360 dev kits are able to get into developers' hands, giving them near completed hardware to create games for. IBM finished the final water noose chip in May 2005, while ATI's eyes watered as their neck was put in the noose. ATI was able to iron out a major issue in the GPU by February 2005, but bug fixes continued until July, and the final chip did not leave ATI's factories until September, barely 2 months before the console's launch. And still, Microsoft opted not to delay the console even in the face of this, which did mean there was no chance in hell they were getting 3 million units ready for the launch. This signature Xbox style of doing everything under crunch and just fucking winging it behind the scenes wasn't perfect, but hey, it worked in getting them this far, which is impressive. And like, surely nothing else happens after this, right?
Yeah, it wouldn't be a commentary video if I wasn't CSGO surfing, would it? This knife ain't right, though. Let me look around here. Yeah, you know, Shaker Cup's pretty cool. I like the design, you know, like the purple see-through stuff. I can mess with this. Yeah, cool-ass design, but we're on the move because we're on the campaign trail. This is what a controller looks like when you're playing a racing game.
Meanwhile, for the plebeian public, in the mid-2000s, the imminent arrival of the 7th-generation consoles had people itching like oxygen addicts for news, just waiting to see how each of the big three was plotting to kill each other this time around. As the years wore on, while they were still developing their consoles behind the scenes, Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft became locked in a bitter PR war, each trying to show up the other as the guy who was building the coolest thing. And as the 360 got further along, Microsoft shared more details of what exactly their new console was. Starting in January 2004, when they first gave 360 development kits to people who make the video game. With the dev kits being made with the same chips and Mac computers, people started to get an idea of just how powerful Microsoft's new console might be, and potential specs started to leak. GDC took place in March 2004, and it's around that time of the console cycle where when Xbox executives appear anywhere, people anticipate some sort of big announcement. Jay Allard and Robbie Bach even gave a keynote together for the first time here, which seemed huge, and like something even huger might get announced. But this time around, they had different plans for the Xbox 360's reveal. They wanted to wait till much closer to the launch of the console in order to announce the birth of their new baby boy, keeping their cards close to Microsoft's big, hairy bara chest. This was the first in a long string of big events coming and going, Xbox-related people showing up, and then edging the audiences by not saying anything. E3 rolls around in May 2004, same shit happens. There's no announcement of the 360. Disappointing, heartbreaking, perhaps even suicide noteworthy. But thankfully, Microsoft came with a different bombshell announcement, confirming the release date of Halo 2, in the form of Xbox head Peter Moore getting the thing tattooed on his arm, so there was no chance of changing it without getting bullied forever over it. However, Halo 2 did get delayed on PC because a Bungie employee accidentally left a high-res photo of one of the developer's bare ass cheeks in the game files,
That is real. Also at E3, the other guys announced new handheld consoles. Sony came with the PlayStation Portable, or PSP, and Nintendo with the Dick Scrotum, or DS for short. The two other titans getting into a separate console war over handhelds did scare Microsoft a little bit. They were partially relying on last generation console sales petering off around this time to create a gap in the market for next gen machines. But these handhelds were cheaper devices, and they gave Sony and Nintendo some cushion to stem the revenue bleed from declining home console sales. Ironically, if everything went well, the PS3 could have theoretically launched in holiday that year, as the first cell processors left IBM's factory in April 2004. But the launch of the PSP at the same time would have cannibalized the market of awesome PlayStation gaming. So the PS3 had to be moved to at least 2005 to give both devices room to breathe, and unfortunately, when Sony hit other production snags, they pushed the console to at least sometime in 2006. And with Nintendo also launching a handheld in 2004 and little news on a new home console, Microsoft was getting a feeling in their no-no square that they would be the only guys launching a console in 2005. They didn't even get a stroke in, just exploded their jorts immediately. GDC 2005 comes in March that year, and Jay Allard makes his return. Hopes for a Microsoft console announcement are higher than ever. The head of GDC, Jamil Moladina, even invited Allard back specifically because he was horny at the idea of a new Xbox being announced at GDC. Microsoft once again basically made him turtle his own poo by not revealing the console, but they did give the audience the first taste of what Microsoft was going for in the next generation. Allard revealed details on the number of dev kits shipped and claimed the next Xbox would be the best place to develop games in the next generation. Behind the scenes at that event, a prototype demo of Gears of War being developed for the Xbox 360 was showcased, and it got people fiending for what the next box would be capable of. And it was here that the first ever visuals of what the Xbox 360 would be were revealed, with the iconic Blades UI showcased for the first time ever. Shout out Joe Biden, I guess. At this same event, Sony was swearing up and down the PS3 would be easier to develop for than the PS2, but some developers with experience making games for it were calling bullshit early, and to rub salt in the wound, Xbox gave away 1,000 Samsung HD TVs to developers who were in attendance. It was a move that one Sony employee called bribery that I would call a good deal. Nothing major really moved the needle until May 2005, though. You know, it was once said that MTV as a network and gamers have a high crossover audience. I'm sure this is still true today. And in Microsoft's endless crusade to try and seem cool, instead of making a big announcement at something like E3 or some other big industry event, they bagged their own 30-minute TV spot on MTV to globally reveal the Xbox 360. And in Xbox tradition, the show was quickly cobbled together. The opinion of one Reggie Fils-Aimé was that it was conjured into reality a bit too quickly. You know, if Microsoft fucked up again, they might have had to suffer the wrath of a second Reggie, and God forbid they summon the full Reggie trio. What followed is possibly the most mid-2000s piece of media ever created.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Killers.
This thing featured celebrities like Elijah Wood and Tony Hawk. The Pimp My Ride guys made a laptop out of the original Xbox and made it all cool and graffitied and shit. And it was the first time that the public got to game on an Xbox 360. It made it look like Microsoft had a working machine already, when in reality the final hardware was not done and people were actually gaming on MacGyvered together Cthulhu contraptions. It was yet another in a long line of lavish events that Microsoft threw for anything they did in gaming, but this might be the best documented and my favorite one. I need y'all to understand what a time capsule this is. The video literally opens with the iPod silhouette commercial with gorillas playing. The editing is closer to a modern-day Bollywood film or K-drama than anything currently on Western television. Lil Jon was there in his prime. These days, he has to downgrade to much lesser events like the Democratic National Convention. These bumpers are also just genuinely insane. I'm just gonna talk for a little bit while I let these roll, because I did not think it was possible for images to just physically blow bursts of air from your screen that make your eyebrows go through your hairline. The synesthesia, the green lights everywhere, the prediction of the Kwite G-Sub shaker, it's all perfect! And in a searing indictment of what year it was, Jay Allard gets introduced on stage as the Lord of the Ring.
What's going on, man?
The launch was huge and absolutely got people talking. E3 2005 was less than a week after this big initial reveal, setting up a perfect sequel that got to focus on the games that would actually be on the console. Nintendo and Sony had similarly massive plans, and the show became a contest on who could stunt the hardest. Ken Kutaragi is set to give the Sony presentation right before Microsoft, and he came in swinging, boasting about how much more powerful the PS3 was compared to the Xbox 360, that it supported a 1080
1080p resolution compared to the 360's micro-dick 720p. The 25 gigs of storage on every Blu-ray disc versus the 360's measly 9 gig DVDs. And that really boils my blood, you know, because the HD DVD actually had. Sony had some really good-looking demos too, with perfect curves that were supposed to show what the PS3 was graphically capable of. And while a lot of these were pre-rendered, every announcement Sony was making still got a big seal clap from the audience. And for the finale, Kutaragi finally unveiled the PlayStation 3 with a spring 2006 release window. The next generation of Sony is here! Details are sparse though. All we got really was a sneak peek and a vague launch window. Their whole presentation was basically communicating things on vibes and broad strokes instead of the full story. This left Microsoft though as the only game in town actually gearing up to drop a console in 2005. Even though the PS3 was technically beefier, Microsoft still hammered home on the next-geniness of the 360 with its improved capabilities, showcasing a number of anticipated titles coming to the console, notably including Dead or Alive 4's jiggle physics, ones that were actually running on the machine to show exactly what type of titty the 360 could simulate. Also, I kinda lied about Nintendo doing it big this year. They decided to play this one all mysterious and aloof, only saying that their new console was codenamed Revolution while sharing minimal hardware details. And the question of who won the event squatted rent-free in the audience's mind. Sony had wowed the conference with spectacle and was seen as overshadowing Xbox. Robbie Bach, meanwhile, defended the Xbox's performance at E3 as actually showing what it could do, you know, since they actually had something of a working machine. Meanwhile, Sony was all smoke, mirrors, piss, and shit that didn't actually show what games on the PS3 looked like or what it would be like for devs to make games for it. Kaz Hirai from Sony called the new Xbox the Xbox 1.5 and said Microsoft launching first wasn't really that big of a deal because Sony had come out on top before, even when they weren't the first to be on the market. Chris Morris of CNN said E3 2005 was boring, and that based on the actual information revealed, there wasn't any real winner, only Sony winning the PR war. Sony held an after-party at Dodger Stadium, and they won the hearts of gamers by beating Microsoft's Dead or Alive pixel titties by having strippers with flesh breasts at the party. That E3 was a microcosm of how the big three were positioning themselves going into the next generation. Sony was showy and talking a big game about how they had the best stuff and the greatest capabilities, and they used concepts of what stuff on the PS3 might maybe look like. You know, things that play well to a crowd but don't mean much of anything until you actually have more. Meanwhile, Microsoft made more grounded offerings to developers where their proof of concept actually proved the concept because the visuals were real. Meanwhile, Nintendo president Satoru Iwata was busy listening to Maroon 5. That August, details on the 360's price were unveiled, where the premium model with the hard drive cost $399 and the cheaper one with no hard drive cost $299. The response was mixed, as most people like a thing that costs less money, but hardcore gamers feared that developers would make their games less pretty to target the lowest common denominator. In September, the 360 was announced to launch on November 22nd, 2005 in North America, December 2nd in Europe, and December 10th in Japan, with a total of 25 to 40 games projected to be released on the console by the end of the year. Sales for Microsoft's Xbox division were expected to grow by 50% by the end of the fiscal year, and they were targeting sales of 4.5 to 5.5 million 360s sold by June 2006. And at the end of September, Microsoft made a bid to answer Sony's use of Blu-ray in the PS3 by finally adopting Toshiba's HD DVD format, all in the righteous crusade to help it win the format wars, and also with the hope that the PS3 would have a massive money sink in the form of running their games on a failed disc format. I wish that the HD DVD was my father. This would be a huge win for us DVD heads. I'm a diehard. The final event before the launch of the Xbox 360 was X05, making it an important one. Basically, Microsoft tried one last time to schmooze the media into liking their Xbox by hosting another big fuck-off party, this time in Amsterdam since weed and prostitution are legal there. That event had Xbox 360 glaze galore. They let games media get hands-on with some of the premier launch titles. Perfect Dark Zero was being framed as the console's killer app, but throwing mud in the face of Microsoft's plans, Call of Duty 2 routinely got more favorable reactions from media and audiences, and the event was basically one final gamble to give 1,000 people in games media and journalism some one-on-one time to make love with the 360 ahead of its launch, in the hopes that it would convince these tastemakers to recommend the 360 as a product worth getting parasocially invested in. At this point, Microsoft had done everything they could to make their case, and it was up to the people to decide if they did enough.
This is me desperately trying to remember the muscle memory of how to do a 720 pistol swap on Black Ops 2, which was all a downstream effect of the launch.
Microsoft's global launch was like only kinda simultaneous, with each region getting the 360 within a few weeks of each other. To be fair, this was blindingly fast when compared to earlier console launches. We're attempting to go global in 18 days instead of 18 months, Peter Moore once said. You gotta give him a break, man. It was 2005, globalism was new, Saddam Hussein was still alive, and as you know, achieving this required strict deadlines at every rung of the production ladder. Parts had to be built by a certain date so they could be assembled into completed units by a certain date, where any missed deadline meant the whole thing might be a wash. Thankfully, the planning for the launch event itself had much more time to work. Okay, only 6 weeks out from the actual launch in November, and Microsoft didn't even have a venue picked out. What they came up with while panicking, though, was the idea of a Burning Man-style event mixed with Area 51 for the most devout Xbot disciples to line up at. It took place just a day before the 360's official release at a random fucking aircraft hangar in the middle of the Mojave Desert, an event dubbed Zero Hour, with 360 branding shoved in just about every orifice that was not airtight. The invitation process was also fucking bizarre. One method was through ARGs that involved hiring a dude to make crop circles in the Midwest US for players to decipher. Marching bands were choreographed in specific patterns as part of the whole deal. Just crazy shit, man. All that just to tell the winners that they had been given special permission to pay for their own trip out to the Mojave. The event was filled with security dogs sniffing backpacks and porta potties with signs warning about snakes and other desert animals that might surprise snack on your balls. Green was the predominant color of the night, shocker, with the whole warehouse awash in Kwite-colored lights inside and out. It was a spectacle that was visible from miles away. The opening ceremony was hosted by top execs and architects of the Xbox 360 like Jay Allard, just doing crowd work, hyping up how much human gumption went into the moment that they were all currently in, and when the doors finally opened, the masses rushed to get through the gates. But a few die-hard fans did stay behind to shake the hands of execs behind the 360. A few of the masterminds responsible for some of the biggest entertainment platforms of the day, but who had a fraction of the celebrity somebody behind things equally as impactful might receive. As it came closer to true Zero Hour, when the first 360s would officially go on sale, gamers lined up at the pop-up Best Buy checkout counters, hoping to be the first owners of a new Microsoft consumer product. They eagerly counted down the 360 individual seconds slowly ticking by. Seriously, they legit counted down for 6 minutes. I have taken poop breaks shorter than that when I worked at fast food. Finally, though, that number reached 0, and the Best Buy trucks flew open to let the light of God touch the first 360s to be sold to anyone ever. And who exactly were God's chosen gamers? Two random dudes from Mississippi, Edgar Bounds and Mike Deadweiler. The men of the moment were two fellas who drove for 35 hours straight to the Mojave. They got to the event 20 hours early on accident, though, but after hearing their story, the Best Buy manager in charge of handling the 360s was so impressed and probably a little scared by their enthusiasm that he let them cut to the front of the line. And get this, the guy who brought them to the stage to claim the rewards for their loyalty was fucking Tommy the Clown. Yes, the one from the Not Like Us music video. Listen, I know he's like an actual living local legend, but I just want to reference things. You'll never be able to stop me from referencing things I like. I want to be buried in a landfill of HD DVDs. People showed up from across the world for a variety of reasons. One Chelsea Clapper, the first woman in the line, was one of probably a few unwitting girlfriends who got dragged along to Zero Hour by their boyfriends on 0 hours of sleep because that guy just wanted the new game box really bad. Others, like Mike Henriquez, viewed the event as being a part of history. Being the first guy in your friend group with a 360 made you the dude whose house everybody wanted to hang out at. It was something special, both socially and sentimentally. And you know, despite throwing together everything at a whiplash speed, Xbox once again managed to create a pretty compelling product. The event itself was pretty good. Memory cards were handed out so people could take the accounts they made at 0 Hour back home with them, as well as doubling as a memento of the event. Microsoft PR and journalists had an aptly named green room. I know that's what they're actually called, it's just funny here specifically. You know, just in order to get an inside look at the operation. And access to 1 million beers was allegedly present if you were 18. That may have been a misprint, or Microsoft was playing loose with the law. And despite the corporate nature of it all, the 0 Hour was special to those who went. Being a fan of Xbox didn't so much feel like consumer brain rot, as it felt like being being part of a community of consumers with brain rot. 0 Hour was the place to be as a gamer, and the 360 was the newest, most prestigious, most gamer box to get. Across the country, similar launch events took place. In Midtown New York, it was pissing down hard the night of the launch. But gamers who lined up did not give a damn about rain or shine, they just wanted to get on COD and grind. In Seattle, Bill Gates was in attendance at a Bellevue launch event, continuing the tradition of personally handing over the first console of the night. It's like the first gift of Christmas on the Polar Express, except better. Stores were rated of their limited supply almost immediately, with stock across the states just getting scooped up instantly. People would camp outside retailers overnight when they heard a re-up was coming, and the earliest bird scooped up those few new units like worms. When the December 2nd Europe launch came around, it was similarly packed. Large crowds formed for the midnight launches, and the 360 even became the fastest-selling home console in the United Kingdom at the time. The only question left to answer was how things were gonna go in Japan. Would the project manage to leave Manhattan this time around? Well, December 10th rolls up, and at the same store the PSP had launched at the year prior, Xbox 360 is having its own launch event. And like in the West, people showed up for the spectacle of the Xbox 360. Just a lot less of them. Microsoft had shipped 159,000 units to Japan, only managing to sell about a third of those, with the added burn of the 360 selling less than half the units the original Xbox did during its launch in Japan. As the last stop on the world tour, it was kind of a sore spot to end on for Microsoft. And you know, whatever happened to those production deadlines? The demand for the Xbox in the West was basically a hysteria, but the ability to meet this demand was severely handicapped by the lack of supply. US locations already had low stock, and when they got more, the inventory was quickly cleaned out. To try and stop units from flying off shelves so fast, some store managers were even adding new rules. Things like, if you wanted to buy a 360, customers also had to buy $700 of non-refundable merch just for the privilege. eBay CEO Meg Whitman said that over 40,000 Xbox 360s were being sold on eBay, fucking scalpers, some featuring insane markups of $1,000 or higher. There was even some speculation that Microsoft created the shortage on purpose to fan the flames of the demand. Also, to artificially raise the reputation boost that owning a 360 would give someone. Real shortage or not, the dissonance between the Xbox's massive demand in the West while it collected dust on store shelves in the East meant that there were tons of consoles nobody was buying in one market, actively prevented from getting to those who were clamoring for it in the other side of the globe. Microsoft's plan of a global launch required, at the very least, 2 million consoles in reserve, 3 million if you wanted to be safe. And in November 2005, Microsoft told industry analysts that they plan to move a similar number of consoles by February 2006. But ahead of the launch itself, some analysts were already blowing the whistle on those numbers. Retailers were reporting that they were being shipped far less units than expected, and analysts said it was likely that Microsoft would move closer to 1.5 to 2 million units over the holidays. And due to the snags in the 360's development, the amount of consoles ready to be shipped by the end of 2005 was far closer to that 1.5 million number than the 3 million Microsoft really wanted you to believe. And the reasons pretty much all stemmed from the razor-thin deadlines required from the 360's accelerated dev cycle. The first official Xbox 360 unit did not finish assembly until just 69 days before launch. Remember, the console's aesthetics were being designed without regard for the actual internals, with both of them having to be finalized alongside each other and in much less time than is ideal. Issues arose with the companies Microsoft picked as their manufacturing partner. ATI's GPU and its delays were only one of the ways that shit went tits up. You see, the Xbox 360 contains 1,700 unique components, where much of the major hardware in the machine was first of its kind and hard enough to mass produce on its own. Made even worse because of the speed run that Microsoft was having everybody operate on. There were cases where the same part sourced from different suppliers was of varying quality, and this became a real issue in regards to the RAM used on the 360. See, they were using a new type of memory called GDDR3, which had only begun production in the back half of 2005. And since it was so new, there was a limited amount of suppliers who could actually make the stuff. Some chip makers tasked with the job, like Hynix, were behind schedule, while others like Infineon were producing chips that ran below the minimum speed the 360 needed. And this forced other companies somewhere along the supply chain, like Flextronics, to set up entirely new testing lines to figure out what chips were actually good enough to stick in the machines. And it wasn't so simple as just scaling up production of GDDR3. Again, the tech was an itty-bitty little baby, and Microsoft was already hoarding a fifth of available GDDR3 chip production. There was no single issue you could point to as to why the shortages happened, but altogether it dominoed into the mess that left gamers everywhere jealous that their friend had gotten a new Xbox before them. them. One might start to feel concerned that Microsoft's strategy of throwing things together last minute and crunching might not always pay off. But still, even though Microsoft was going through hell on the back end, the launch of the consoles that were available was going swimmingly. In the vein of Xbox being the console to develop games for, Call of Duty 1 sold gangbusters on PC, and Microsoft approached Activision to make the sequel, Call of Duty 2, the franchise's console debut, and to put it on the Xbox 360. And you know, you live in modern day where there's a new COD every year, it was a resounding success. The game sold 200,000 units the first week, being the biggest launch title on the 360, and partially filling the FPS-shaped hole that Halo's absence created. It served as the 360's breakout game, with 77% of people who bought the 360 at launch also buying Call of Duty 2 with their console. Microsoft also managed to lock down EA for the launch, finally headlocking that beast who used to fight with Microsoft over being on Xbox Live. Or the 360 became the only next-gen platform you could play a bunch of 2K6 editions of EA Sports games. Other notable releases at launch were Peter Jackson's King Kong, the official game of the movie, and Gun, just Gun. There was a healthy 18 games available at launch, but the 360's launch lineup was ever-changing. Some games passed certification well on schedule with months to spare, like Call of Duty, while others like Quake 4 had to cut features entirely to get it out the door in time. There were several big sluggers like Oblivion that had to be delayed into the next year entirely too. And you know, hardcore gamers are an active bunch, where the most dedicated worked through that catalog in no time. And for early adopters of most consoles, this means a drought of games on that thing for months. But for the first time ever, the Xbox Live Arcade allowed people to download games directly to their console, which really helped to hold the jokes of newest console has no games at bay for some time. And on top of all of that, let's not forget that the Xbox 360 launched a year ahead of the PS3. It was a literal game changer. It meant that the next generation started with Microsoft, and the Xbox 360 was the only place to get next generation games for a full-ass year. Even third-party offerings were by default Xbox exclusives because there was nowhere else to go for a next generation console, which ended up buying Microsoft time to do their little dance. Several games like Oblivion were later released on the PS3, but because of that console's late arrival and the 360's more accessible hardware, it benefited from being the first place you could play the cutting edge of gaming. I could talk console wars all day, and I will, but the sales are what moves the needle. And when breaking down early 360 numbers, ultimately, due to the shortages, Microsoft undershot their targets. They only sold 1.5 million units by the end of 2005, and they lowered their estimates for the first 90 days of sale down to 2.5 million units. And that shortage didn't just affect them. Less consoles in the wild means less gamers to sell games to. EA specifically said that December 2005 sales basically shit the bed. EA CEO Larry Probst attributed this to last-gen game sales drying up as people saved for a new console. But the lack of new consoles to actually buy games for meant there wasn't enough Xbox 360 owners to sell to. And despite Microsoft's best efforts at keeping manufacturing costs low, there was still speculation that the 360 was sold at a loss on every unit, though this has been disputed by other analysts. Also around this time, reports were beginning to come in of early Xbox 360 models failing on customers. And in response, Microsoft said that the return rates were below the industry standard for new electronics of 3 to 5%. Microsoft kept pretty quiet about all the speculation, only saying that the numbers were good and that the 360 was on track to hit 4.5 to 5.5 million units sold by June 30th, and that they were now working with a new partner to produce even more units. Meanwhile, culturally, it's hard to say whether it's because of or in spite of, but the 360 successfully became an icon in pop culture. It was a symbol of status for the first people actually able to get their phalanges on it, and the clout attached to owning one was big because it was so hard to get. This also had a side effect of people getting frustrated that Microsoft wouldn't let them give the company money, and mockery of the 360's shortage became pretty common online. When talking critical reception, NPR described the thing as worth the $399 asking price for the hardcore gamer, implying that it was a machine that put the gamer and the games first. And controversially, an unaired ad for the 360 leaked that featured strangers in public getting in a standoff with finger guns before they all pretend to start shooting each other. This was probably trying to emphasize the online interconnected aspect of the 360, but in a post-9/11 world, that ad was seen as pretty tasteless, where in a funnier post-9/11 world, the ad would have aired anyway. In the face of bad press, Microsoft tried to highlight the positives, like how much people beat their dick to Call of Duty 2, and that compared to the launch of the original Xbox, the 360's was actually going incredibly well, where they'd spin the shortages into a story of ravenous demand and unprecedented success instead of one of manufacturing hell. All in all, Microsoft was benefiting greatly from being the only game in town. Discussions centered on on them, both good and bad, because they were the only dudes to talk about. But at Microsoft, there was a looming specter. They knew that despite getting to market first, they were still entering the fray as the underdog. The PS3's delay worked out in Microsoft's favor, but it was still a sleeping beast that Xbox knew it had to keep its head on a swivel for. The last time the PS3 had been given a major showing was at E3 2005, where it was touted as more powerful than the 360. Nvidia said it was the most important consumer product of the decade, demos of the PS3's capabilities melted the crown's minds, and renders of an Asian woman mogged dead or alive jiggle physics and the brains of gooners everywhere. Still, the only thing that was concretely revealed was the look of the console, that logo in the Spider-Man 3 font, and a vague spring 2006 release window. No price point, no official specs, and no exact dates. There were just too many unknowns for Xbox to really know what they were up against, and Sony left that E3 as the winner in many people's eyes. Since then, news on the PS3 had been silent. Peter Moore even said at CES 2006, "They're awfully quiet about details if they are truly going to launch in the spring as they said." Bill Gates was taunting Sony, saying that while they were at a price disadvantage with the original Xbox, it was likely to be reversed this time around. In a rare public appearance at a conference in San Francisco, Ken Kutaragi hyped up the concept of the PS3's power, saying that the cell processor was going to be used in stock market computers and medical settings, where the PlayStation 3 would be the place the tech got pioneered, all at a time when the 360 faced continued shortages. And it wasn't until GDC 2006 in March that Microsoft finally said Xbox 360 supply was surging, with the amount of consoles going out doubling or tripling even. At that same GDC, the day after Xbox's announcement, Sony hit back in their own press conference. They opened by teasing their own tip a little bit, announcing that the PlayStation 2 had not only outsold the 360 during that last holiday season, despite being older, but that it had also crossed the 100 million units sold mark. It left out the whole thing about Xbox shortages and the cheaper price of the console, but it was a smart play. Privately though, Sony was making some major fumbles. They had confirmed to developers that the PS3 was not dropping in spring that year, but rather in November 2006. It wasn't unexpected, but it was still disappointing, and it gave Microsoft even more leeway to operate in Sony's absence. And it wasn't until E3 2006 that the PS3 finally popped out in public in a major way. May 9th that year, Sony finally took to the stage to share hard details regarding their next generation console, like the Germa giant enemy crab.
So here's this giant enemy crab.
The important bits were what the console actually was, though. The specs, the release date, and the price. Xbox team members recalled the trepidation over this announcement and how afraid of it they were at the time. The PS3 was positioned as both a powerful game machine and a Blu-ray player, at a time where the PS3 would be hundreds of dollars cheaper than any dedicated Blu-ray player on the market. And the Xbox 360 shortages continued to plague its reputation. What if the PS3 was able to plug in that hole with their own machine? They were under the type of stress that makes your teenage acne come back. That mystery of the PS3 made it a boogeyman, and not knowing was the biggest threat of it all. So in an era when you couldn't just put the live stream up on the TV, the Xbox offices had to clamor and crowd around each other to get a good view of the tiny laptop screen Sony's E3 presentation was playing on. The PS3 would release with a 20GB and 60GB hard drive options. It would ship on November 11th, 2006 in Japan and November 17th, 2006 in North America. And the cheapest PS3 that you could buy would be $500 for the scuffed one. More expensive than the most premium model 360, $500. The guys at Microsoft were understandably shocked. In the official Xbox doc, they said it felt like they'd just been handed the console generation on a silver platter. The opponent's hubris and Sony's rhetoric around the pricing wasn't helping people's reaction much. They were saying shit like, for consumers to think to themselves, I will work more hours to buy one, is an honor. And I'll be honest, that was probably just a bad translation, but it didn't look good for Sony at all. That E3, Sony's presentation left the taste of unwashed asshole in everybody's mouths. And it was Xbox's event to lose. They did not lose. During their presentation, Xbox showed off Gears of War, the mega hit releasing later that year. They had a bunch of other huge announcements, and most importantly, they ended the entire presentation with the announcement and release date of Halo 3. Coming just next year in 2007 too, man. Bill Gates moonwalked that stage. Just Bullet Bill over here coming at you a banger after banger right after Sony willingly jumped into the bottomless pit. Microsoft was riding so high off of this. The purest of cocaine could not compare. They had the year head start over Sony. They had price point over Sony. They had online capabilities over Sony. For Christ's sake, the PS3 did not even have a version of Xbox Live live party chat. They just danced all over them that year at E3. It was a complete blowout. Things were looking great for Microsoft. They hadn't won the war, but winning seemed like a thing they might actually be able to do now. The 7th generation was going to be a big one for Xbox. And of course, it was, in one way or the other.
I don't really have a funny bit here. I was making this thing and thought it might end this way. Like, you work so hard on something and it all comes crashing down. The Mark of the Beast, Part 1.
Barely 2 weeks after the 360 launched in the United States, IGN posted an article called Xbox 360 Glitch in the System? And it focused on one Jonathan Giles, who bought the console on launch day. Guile had spent over $1,500 on an Xbox 360, games, and other paraphernalia, where within the first 24 hours of owning the machine, every game he played froze in the first hour of booting that shit up. Giles called his local game shop, and they told him they couldn't do Xbox exchanges because they had no Xboxes to exchange. Then Jonathan called Microsoft, and he was on hold for eons from how clogged up the lines apparently were. He noted, I guess a lot of people were having problems. Thankfully, when he got a Microsoft representative by the throat, they were genuinely helpful when held at threat of digital suffocation. There was a gauntlet of over-the-phone fixes he was made to do that didn't work, but by the end of it, Giles got overnight shipped a cardboard coffin for him to stick his deceased 360 inside of, and 3 days later, Microsoft shipped him back a working one. Still, this soon after launch, Giles' case was just one of many stories where people were saying their 360 was busted already, and for a number of reasons. There were games freezing, discs were getting scratched, and there were even some consoles that got completely bricked, marked by 3 ominous red lights around the power button. With this many issues this soon, questions began to pop up on how well made the 360 actually was. Was it rushed to market? Is something fundamentally dog water about the design? Or is this the internet age, blowing a standard occurrence during console launches out of proportion? A soon-to-be infamous line was uttered once again. Microsoft spokesperson Molly O'Donnell admitted that the 360 had issues, but that the return rate was within or below the consumer electronics average of 3 to 5%. The company said issues were a case-by-case sort of deal and not the result of a core system issue. The remedy they gave was to treat your Xbox like a newborn child. Make sure it's properly ventilated, don't place it on a carpet or in cramped areas, don't move the console while a game disc is physically running on it. You know, typical baby shit. But only a day after their first article, IGN drops Glitch in the System Round 2. You see, the comment section of Part 1 acted as a virtual rally for 360 owners who had their own issues with the console. These comments were filled with anecdotes of the 360 breaking in a myriad of creative ways, and IGN chose to round up those complaints and post them unfiltered in this sequel. Issues included all the things I already mentioned, but some people had beef with a few of the stories described as actually being the person's fault, not Microsoft's, where they were treating their console like shit and Microsoft had nothing to do with it. But most interestingly, one of these entries included the potential earliest mention I found of some variation of the Red Ring of Death, though it being the first mention of it is dubious. The story goes like this. You see, this fella bought their 360 on launch day, and the thing got red-ringed within 10 days after the fact. This guy claims they shipped their console out for repair and that it was currently in Texas undergoing these fixes when they made that post. Assuming this was recently after launch, this would put this story sometime around late 2005 or early 2006, depending on how long that repair process took. This article was updated well past 2006, but I can't see old versions of it to check when certain edits were made. Via context clues, though, this specific comment reads like it was in late 2005, but it's kind of thrown off track when it mentioned a lawsuit that Microsoft had been served as ridiculous. The only cases around Xbox defects I could find were a 2007 lawsuit about the scratched discs and a 2008 lawsuit about the Red Ring, both which occurred well after when it seems like this story was shared. It's hard to pinpoint exactly where the term originated from because further down in the same article, someone refers to the red lights as the Ring of Power's left side blinking red. Much more vague and dubious. They didn't call it the Red Ring or any version of that at all. What they described is an entirely different error code. It means something different than the 3 red lights that define the ring as we know it. By early 2006, this issue had really only escalated as the story of a 37-year-old Chris Cesarek began to make the rounds. Chris managed to tear his way through 4 Xbox 360s within half a year of the console being released. Brother, do not gamble. The odds hate you more than they hate SCP-7000. Cesarek pre-ordered his first machine on August 12, 2005, well before the console's release, but still didn't get his hands on one until December 23rd. It was a month after the launch, just barely getting his Christmas gift to himself in time for the actual holiday. That box worked fine for less than a month before dying, much like McDonald's hiring practices, where the console kaputted on January 21st, 2006. Chris noticed 3 peculiar red lights around the power button, something he personally and prophetically was calling the 3 red lights of death. It's funny because there's an intersection near where I live that has the same name. Coincidentally, a lot of drunk drivers go there. One thing that Chris remembers from the time was Microsoft support being really bad. A rep had told him to go to the store to get his console replaced if it was less than 30 days old, to which Chris had to tell them, in his most respectful to service workers voice he could manage, "Are you perhaps crazy? Have you potentially been living in a cave? Currently, you can't buy this console anywhere now. No one has replacements." Luckily, he did eventually get a refurbished 360 from Microsoft. One he had to send back that February because Xbox Live wasn't enabled on the damn thing. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me, you can't get fooled again. Don't save it. Chris started to get louder about his problem. He was scorching the earth, posting his problems to the Xbox.com forums, and he told Microsoft PR, "Fix my shit or I'm going to the papers." Threatening to mess with company image got him attention, where Chris took particular issue with Peter Moore for seemingly sweeping issues people had under the rug. So Microsoft decided to get a little more hands-on with Chris's situation. Major Nelson, something like Xbox public mouthpiece at the time, got in touch with Chris directly, and 10 days after sending his second console back, Chris got a new console on February 20th. And that trooper in a new personal best for Chris Cesarek lasted 61 days. It died 3 rotations of the Earth after Hitler's birthday. Chris became truly radicalized against the authoritarian regime of Xbox by now. So he called Microsoft again, he faxed Bill Gates directly, and he eventually emailed the Xbox czar Peter Moore himself one-on-one. And in a surprising show of good faith, Peter Moore called Chris on the phone personally to help him get his shit sorted. And he promised Chris a 3rd replacement, his 4th console overall, and it was in Chris's hands the next day. At the time, some analysts said that however unlucky Cesarek was, the failure rate for the 360 wasn't outside the norm, and that retailers weren't having issues with replacing units. And there was continued speculation that the idea the 360 was less reliable than Spectrum Internet was being exaggerated by the internet, where it wasn't actually that big of a deal, it was just easier than ever for individuals to share their personal experience. And it is true that the internet would have a big role to play in how the 360 was seen moving forward. Chris lamented that his unfortunate journey getting him so much attention turned him into a reluctant gamers' rights activist, where Microsoft wasn't actually addressing the full scope of the issue, citing a blog post from one UK gamer who was apparently on his 5th replacement 360. Chris got emails from other 360 owners who supported his crusade, and anecdotes from people who had similar failures on their own consoles. In some ways, Chris Cesarek was the canary in the Xbox coal mine, calling it like he saw it very early on. But at this point, the true extent of the casualties wasn't clear yet, and there was enough ambiguity for internet denizens to call him just another op trying to spin 360s on the X block. But yeah, he's just a PlayStation fanboy who is also spinning tricks on Sony's penis. These issues are harder to dismiss, though, when the folk it happens to arguably bleed more green than the chumps who made the Xbox. Rob and Mindy Cassingham were Xbox diehards. They were at 0 Hour, driving there all the way from Utah. They wore license plate necklaces that read Xbox on them at the event, and in 2006, Rob Cassingham was even in the process of registering for the Xbox 360 license plate in Utah. The Cassinghams bought 4 consoles at 0 Hour and went on to buy 2 more from a local retailer. They put these consoles in their own local game center to rent out to kids who couldn't play the cool console at home, and they spread the good word of the Church of Xbox, helping dozens of people locally buy 360s of their own. Matthew 5:42. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. Unfortunately, this enthusiasm was rewarded in the form of every Xbox they bought at 0 Hour shitting the bed. Every time a console failed, Rob had that familiar gauntlet of issues with customer service, staying on the phone for 20 minutes straight just to get a replacement. He had to run through the dialogue tree of over-the-phone fixes for each and every broken box. He had to explain what the 3 red lights of death were to the poor customer service worker every time, and even after all that, replacements still took 2 weeks to get shipped out to him.
When it was all said and done, Rob went public about how crap everything was going, with 7 Xbox 360s failing on him, including one of the replacement units he'd been sent. Naysayers online claimed that their rental center meant the consoles were being overused and that kids were working the things to the bone, so that's why they broke. It had to be. But 3 of the Cassingham's dead units were personal consoles they used at home. Peter Moore once again had to run interference and directly put his tongue into the Cassingham issue to get it sorted. And even in the face of all these anecdotes, Microsoft insisted that failure rates were within that normal consumer electronics range of 3 to 5%. Understandably, Rob Cassingham felt a little hoed and was speculating on if he should just get a PC instead of a new console. Sure, he'd kept the new 360 he'd been sent, but still paid for an extra 2-year warranty for fear of it breaking again and being unable to play new games exclusive to that console. It's kind of depressing how his loyalty was rewarded. He was just a big fan and got fucked. Psalms 137:9, they will grab your babies and throw them against the rocks. And of course, a wound left to fester only spews more pus. On May 26, 2006, IGN drops Glitch in the System Round 3, at a time where 360 failures had proven to be a real and present danger and were being formally named in major publications as the Red Ring of Death. IGN apparently had tons of internal experience with the Red Ring, where apparently 9 different Xboxes pulled the plug on themselves for IGN staff. Even president of the company, Piers Schneider, who was one of the 4 dudes in this Twilight Princess reaction meme, by the way, had his own Red Ring of Death story, and he speculated that the launch batch of Xboxes were just borked across the board. And if you sent a console in for repair, the one that you got sent back was actually a machine from a newer batch, and your old Xbox was actually being thrown on a scrap heap. And still, Microsoft maintained 3 to 5%! And even if that figure's real, it's just not much consolation to the growing community of people who lost a beloved family member to the Red Ring of Death. Tal Blevins at IGN, no relation to Ninja, was another victim of a bricked console. He called Microsoft for that privilege of going through the phone repair multiple choice quiz, and Tal said that when he was on the phone to get his Xbox paperweight replaced, he could hear at least 2 other conversations in the background seeking guidance about the same issue he was having. No matter how many Xboxes were actually failing, to everybody outside of it, it certainly felt like to everybody that the Red Ring problem was bigger than Microsoft was willing to say. And yeah, it turned out that some of the busted units Microsoft got sent for repair weren't the ones being sent back, but instead a different refurbished unit. And that's not like inherently bad at all. If it works, it works. But when those refurbished units are also dying on a mass scale after sending them out, it's hard to ignore how much this seems to happen. Shit was so bad, NeoGAF had an official "My Xbox 360 died and I lived to tell the story" mega-thread. They did that because it got annoying that people were making a new thread every time their own Xbox died. Post on the mega-thread continued until 2013. An issue can only get so big before you just can't ignore it anymore. Even for China, stonewalling only worked for so long, and Microsoft had to munch on some crow eventually. In September 2006, Microsoft acknowledged that an abnormal amount of consoles were being sent in for repair, specifically from the original batch produced in 2005. They admitted that those Xboxes, and only those, were not up to quality, and that they would repair any console produced in 2005 for free if it failed. Finally, there was movement on this front. You know, it was an action that took Microsoft close to a year to take, but only 3 months later, they did even more. You gotta give it to them. That's a response time improvement of 300%. On December 22nd that year, Microsoft dropped a write-up saying that the warranty for all Xbox 360 units was being increased from 90 days to a full year after purchase. Not just for consoles made in 2005, but all of them. And the warranty would be retroactive, so anybody who had previously paid for console repair that would have now qualified for the warranty was going to be reimbursed automatically. These were objectively good things to do for the consumer that addressed their concern. But as far as admitting guilt goes, Microsoft still pleaded no contest. And they still said that the return rates were that normal 3 to 5%. And you know what, man? I believe those guys now. I'm certain that this was just them being nice. They extended that warranty purely as a sign of goodwill, just to prove that you can trust this trillion-dollar corporation. Still, the whole time, public pressure mounted on the internet for changes as to how Microsoft handled Xbox 360 repairs. Not just how long after buying a console Microsoft was willing to do them. The bludgeon which might have broken the camel's spine was a BBC TV show called Watchdog, a decades-old series that looked into the skeevy going-ons of corporations and investigated complaints that viewers had about the products they were consuming, that is to say. Sometime in February 2007, several months after that warranty extension, Watchdog aired a segment about the Red Ring of Death, introducing the topic with
biting commentary.
Its boss, the world's richest man, Bill Gates, has called the Xbox the Ferrari of home entertainment. So why do some of you say it's already more of a clapped-out banger?
I'll say it. Sometimes British people have their moments. Even if it wasn't a show from the world's main character, America, high-profile coverage like this is impossible to ignore. Watch Dogs said they received 248 individual complaints about busted 360s. They weren't breaking the story, but Watch Dogs' coverage of the Red Ring was a sign that it was too big an issue to contain. And the rage of people done dirty by their Xbox 360 breaking was further compounded by Microsoft's reply. What was the reply? I don't know. Take a fucking guess. The return rate of the Xbox 360 is significantly lower than the consumer electronics industry average of 3 to 5%. Anybody having an issue with their Xbox 360 console should call customer service immediately so that we can help. You have to be joking. I don't have a source for that number. I don't know what the real amount is. It could be that. But however many it was e-fucking-nuff. The Red Ring was ultimately a community-driven backlash, where in the digital age, people had brand new ways to express rage and retribution. The Xbox 360 ushered in the era of online gaming, and unfortunately, the rest of the internet also existed, where every other facet of it was lampooning that console. YouTube went live less than a month after the 360 did, where people were able to make their individual voices heard in a way like never before. Some of the first content creator parody videos and rants on the state of the gaming industry were because of the Red Ring, where G4, the TV series, even made a Red Ring parody song about the damn thing. And for the first time ever, the masses were able to post some shit that had just happened to them for the world to see. Whether it was someone's console breaking on them, or someone breaking their console for breaking on them. People gleefully destroyed their machines in a symbolic display of spectacle that represented their frustration with Microsoft. The shit being done to Xbox 360s was pioneering techniques that went on to be used in Guantanamo before the end of the Bush administration. Come on, you expected me to make a Red Ring video and not make a rage montage? In my personal belief system, not doing that would be akin to killing a small puppy. Even the official Xbox documentary has a section of people just tearing their broken consoles to pieces. And it's even narrated by Snoop Dogg, man. It's a tradition. And more importantly, it was a wholly new experience. There were no titles like Red Ring Situation is Crazy. There were no reaction videos to the rage videos. It was just the raw, unfiltered expression of people whose favorite game box had let them down. It was pure. And really, the floodgates would never hold forever. Consoles were failing as soon as the first month of launch. Sure, these instances were quarantined. For a time, there wasn't enough of them to make a widespread stink and to fight against Microsoft's narrative of failure rates being low. But the issue was inevitably going to scale, and the problem wasn't just going to get quieter on its own. One anonymous whistleblower even alleged that even if a console worked fine for years, they were all still ticking time bombs, where the doomsday clock would approach midnight eventually. How long an original batch Xbox would last could range from years on a good unit to mere hours on a shit box until it got griefed. Reminds me of a different guy who'd love to use a bunch of consoles for bomb stuff. But as far as grief goes, there were as many people in the anger stage as there were in the bargaining stage. Plenty of folk wanted to fix their 360s. The only issue was they were getting radio silence from Microsoft about the root of the issue. Microsoft was busy claiming that return rates are actually better than industry standard, thank you very much, and God forbid they acknowledge what the specific issue might be. Just the same drivel about there being no truly systemic problems with the 360, only individual cases. So in the wake of these non-answers, consumers had to work with what they thought was the most likely issue: overheating. This was backed up by articles and news reports by the likes of NBC saying that supernova temperatures were the thing to blame. And really, there wasn't much else to go on. Solder bumps, or solder balls, I saw her balls alright, are the connections inside electronics that bind the different pieces to each other. They keep the one thing together, and the basic thought was that the 360 got so hot that it literally melted the hardware inside it. The solder bumps in the processors would melt, coming undone, and ruining the connections in the tech. So a variety of at-home methods emerged to try to solve this. Perhaps most commonly, the towel trick. Basically, if you had the 3 red rings, this is what you do. Unplug everything from your 360, except for the plug. Next, you wrap that thing and smother it in towels like a cat you have to force to take its medicine. Then, stick the 360 into a wall socket, and you just leave that shit on to cook itself alive for 20 minutes. Just make it blush and stress it out into overheating again. After that, let it sit for another 20 minutes to cool down like a really big microwave meal, and ta-da! Now it just works. According to WikiHow at least, but even then, only for like a day. A different method that feels like it came out of the US Army's improvised munitions handbook is to just stick the Xbox in your goddamn oven. This guy put his busted box in the oven for like 2 minutes with his bare hands, confirming the existence of that mythical guy who doesn't use oven mitts and just thinks the third-degree burns are part of the experience. And apparently, when he took the Xbox out, it worked again. Other people say to let it cook for much longer. Stick the brick in the oven for a full 20 minutes and it'll keep that thing on life support for another month or two. The point is, methods and results may vary, because others rail against this method as potentially contaminating your oven with chemicals that will poison any food you cook in it after and give you cancer. This could be true, I don't know. I just think I'd personally get stronger by inhaling asbestos. There were other at-home fixes like hit-or-miss repair kits, as well as using a heat gun to similar effect as an oven. All of this in response to the overarching game theory that the console got so hot it would literally desolder the hardware inside the console, where heating it back up might make the stuff solder itself back together. The overarching result was that these at-home remedies might work, but only for a little bit, never for good. Microsoft's response through the last few years had been rightly described as vague, where they stuck to that same 3 to 5% return rate mantra for upwards of a year and a half at this point. Todd Humdahl, a big boy at Xbox official, kept to these talking points up to just 3 weeks before the day of reckoning came to roost. There had been mixed to positive reviews on Microsoft's customer service getting replacement units shipped out, further weighed down by the replacement units themselves breaking. But internally, Microsoft knew that this issue was real, it was widespread, and that they were going to have to do something big to hope to right the ship. The only real solution was to offer to repair and replace every broken console for free. Pro bono. And after tallying up every console that needed repairing and all the costs associated, Microsoft estimated that the amount needed to fix the problem was around $1.15 billion, with $250 million of that going straight to FedEx for shipping alone. That was a great day for their shareholders. Peter Moore, the head of Xbox at the time, vividly recalled the moment he had to go tell Microsoft CEO Steve Ballmer the seismic cost of all of this.
I'm expecting to be ripped to shreds.
Peter told him that this was their Tylenol moment, in reference to the 1982 Chicago Tylenol murders. Basically, some dude who has still never been found tampered with Tylenol bottles at a factory and poisoned them with cyanide. This resulted in 7 people dying in mass panic. In response, Johnson & Johnson, the company that owns Tylenol, recalled every Tylenol bottle nationwide and put out a warning to hospitals and customers of the danger. This cost them $100 million in the 80s, or roughly $316 million today. It was sweeping and huge and very expensive, but that action is widely credited as having saved the Tylenol brand in the face of major controversy. Peter knew that this was pretty much their make-or-break moment. If they didn't spend the money, Xbox was as good as dead. He expected to get torn to shreds and lose his job over it. Instead, Steve Ballmer said, "Do it," with apparently no hesitation. He told Pete they'd take the hit first and then figure out what comes next later. On July 5th, 2007, less than a month after Humdahl had last stonewalled any questions about the faultiness of the Xbox 360, Peter Moore posted an open letter to the Xbox community. It starts by saying that the gamers have spoken and that Microsoft has listened. They hadn't been doing a good enough job for their community up to this point. The letter said that while most folk are having a grand old time on the 360, others were rightfully frustrated with a very specific error, and for the first time, they acknowledged that the red ring was real and how widespread it was, in so many words. The letter claimed Microsoft had already made hardware improvements to avoid this issue in the future, and that they were also implementing new policy changes to address it. The extended 1-year warranty would remain going into the future, but in the case of consoles that specifically failed from the red ring, Microsoft would be extending the warranty to 3 years from the date of purchase, and be refunding any gamers who already had to pay for repairs in the past. And perhaps the biggest or most expensive consumer electronics controversy of all time, Microsoft eventually did do the right thing. Though in hindsight, they do self-flagellate a little much for my taste when describing it in their own words.
Kudos to Microsoft for stepping up and putting their money where the red ring of death was.
It was one of the times when I've been proudest to be part of Microsoft, because we made a mistake we owned it and we did the right thing for consumers.
Microsoft claims that the replacement of consoles affected by the core digital errors that caused the red ring concluded in 2011. And this is somewhat misleading, as consoles would still fail after the time when the extended warranty fizzled out. This is why there still exist videos of people blowing up the red ring consoles in 2012 and on, because repairs only concluded because the warranty coverage for those consoles expired. But they concluded nonetheless, and at the time, Microsoft taking a $1 billion hit to save a division of their company that hadn't even been profitable up to that point was a big story, and it bought them a lot of goodwill with consumers. It's widely cited that the Xbox 360 as a product survived where the red ring had killed so many individual units because Microsoft eventually acted swiftly and decisively to fix the issue. Also because people just genuinely loved the games on the console, a new model of the 360 that didn't have the same core issues as the launch model released soon after, and game developers really liked making games on the Xbox, especially over the PS3. And to cap off 2007, Microsoft was gearing up for the release of the biggest video game to ever video game, Halo 3. And at the time, it really was the most anticipated game to ever release. The Xbox 360 did not have its own Halo game yet, creating metric shit tons of hype. It is very hard to overstate just how unavoidable Halo was as a franchise in the 2000s. It showed that Microsoft didn't just have money to throw around, they also had fucking media. Media that was projected to outdo the sales of Spider-Man 3 in the biggest launch gaming had ever had. All this skating off the goodwill that Microsoft gained from seemingly fixing every broken Xbox 360 ever, where Xbox got to say, "This achievement belongs to us, so give us the gamer score."
You could say a catastrophe was avoided, but there's always more going on behind the scenes. Sometimes a fire looks like it's too big to be put out, but turns out that the paper you were burning is not very flammable. Mark of the Beast Part 2.
It's all well and good that Microsoft eventually got their shit together, but that whole time, even when they eventually fessed up that something was wrong and did something adjacent to the right thing in response, they never answered one question. Why the fuck did the red ring even happen? Whatever it was left deep scars at Microsoft. They say they can giggle like the Gossip Girls about the OG Xbox not turning on at E3, but no one laughs about the red ring.
Nobody laughs at the red rings.
As someone who's gone deep scouring official sources, works from reputable journalists, comments from hardware technicians who specialize in this type of thing, and what Microsoft said themselves, the answer is like a junior year English teacher's love life. Complicated and involves too many people. So let's try and start at the start. The rot basically stemmed from the root, and after a decade removed from the incident, Xbox staff will tell you the same thing, just in much softer terms.
We were absolutely focused on getting out ahead of the PS3. We needed to be seen as the start of the next generation.
The 360 was 5 to 10 times more powerful than the original Xbox. We had to push technology and solutions that didn't exist.
We're bringing up new hardware with software that isn't quite done yet on new test systems that we're developing in real time.
And that had a domino effect on the whole product.
Dead lines. It always comes back to rushing the 360 to beat Sony to store shelves. That squeezed every aspect of production to the point of asphyxiation. The oldest comprehensive red ring breakdown I could find was written by the venerable Dean Takahashi, whose reporting has been essential to writing this video. You may have noticed his Xbox 360 Uncloaked book to the side over here, abused at its corners from me turning its pages over and over again. But he really is like kind of the goat on this stuff. He even appeared in the official Xbox documentary. And several things Dean was one of the first to report on in the late 2000s were seemingly confirmed in that documentary. Though when Microsoft is in charge of saying them, they put it in much nicer terms. For instance, several warnings existed during production as to just how fucked the 360 might be. Before launch, as these consoles were starting to get assembled, apparently one anonymous engineer said, "Stop, you have to shut down the line." Not in a one-and-done, limited Fortnite skin type of way where somebody might have just missed it, but in a repeated all the time, the weekend being on the item shop for 3 months straight sort of way. You see, when things go wrong on a production line, it means you have to pause the whole thing and get into the weeds between the cement to find the root of the issue. This takes time, which the Xbox team did not have. So even when several qualified engineers were sounding the alarm on potential problems, there wasn't enough of them to convince the executives to slow down. They moved on with producing consoles on schedule anyways in reference to the all-powerful, immovable deadline. During peak production, a new unit apparently got spat out every 4 4 seconds. And stopping the line would mean slowing production. And to Robbie Bach, that could mean delaying the release of the console in markets outside the States, gutting the promise they'd made of a global Xbox 360 launch. And worse yet, production issues couldn't be nailed to any one thing. A memo from August 30th, 2005 was boo-hooing about several. It mentioned our good old friend, the overheating ATI graphics chips, as well as cracking heat sinks, underperforming GPUs, and more, while production in general was still far behind schedule. An important term to define here is yield. Yield is the percentage of manufactured units that actually work. For example, let's just say that I produced 100 femur breakers, but only 40 of them actually break femurs. This would mean that the yield rate of my femur breakers is 40%. For the 360, the yield rate at the time was 32%. So for every 100 consoles produced, 68 were broken. Now, to be fair, when you're manufacturing a new product, issues aren't uncommon at the start. The general expectation is that when you begin producing them, yields will be low, but will eventually improve over time as you get better at making something. That makes sense. The issue was that for the 360, these very needed improvements to the yield never really came. Todd Homdahl recalled a time during testing where only like 50 to 60% of consoles were working.
You build 100 of these things, only 50 or 60 of them would work, which is really, really bad. Like a real robust yield rate would have been 90, 95.
In the documentary, Leo Del Castillo says they were fighting through a fog of war the whole time.
Is there something wrong with the design of the product, or are we testing it incorrectly?
And as far as if they were testing shit wrong, some answers do actually exist there, because the testing machines used to inspect 360s were apparently flawed, and they definitely did not have enough of them. You see, Microsoft chose to cheap out a little. They opted to not pay Simtech, the company that made the testing machines, their consulting fee. Simtech charges that fee to build, manage, and debug test machines, and the amount Microsoft saved ranged from like $2 million to $25 million. That is a big range of numbers, I know, but it's a hell of a lot smaller than $1 billion. This left Microsoft with only like 500 subpar testing machines at launch, which itself was only like a third of the 1,500 they would need to be safe. Prior to launch, defective units were piling up by tens of thousands, eventually reaching 6 digits at its peak, and Microsoft just straight up did not have time to fix them. So instead, they packed them in boxes and stashed them away in warehouses that they were calling the bone pile, where the intention was to come back to fix them later when they figured out what the fuck they were even doing. Still, as things improved, attempts were made to chip away at the bone pile and turn them into upstanding working 360s in society, but they never got close to fixing all of them. Many of these busted boxes became those refurbished units that were sent out to people as replacements for their broken 360s, where many of those refurbished units went on to fail again later. Yields climbed behind the scenes ahead of launch, but not nearly fast enough, and the breakneck pace of development spread the staff thin, where engineers were pulled from one position to the next, forcing them to bounce all over the place. And I believe, personally, that the most significant misstep was when Jay Allard, in the middle of 360 development, decided to invent the Microsoft Zune, opting to pull engineers off the 360 entirely to help make a Guardians of the Galaxy 2 sight gag. This is a mistake which single-handedly destroyed the Xbox brand. The Zune is an evil, evil machine filled with demons in it, and worse, AJR's music. An audio-only version of this video is available on Zune Marketplace, which you can download for free on up to 3 Windows computers with the Zune Music Pass. Despite the pandemonium behind the scenes, Microsoft still managed to keep the illusion of a single 20-something-year-old with his life somehow together. Dean himself even fell for the facade of a house in order, when really it was a bachelor pad that the dude only cleaned when he had people come over once every half a year. Lord Takahashi visited a production factory in August 2005 where a sign was proudly showing its ass claiming that IBM finished their processor back in December 2004, where Dean later found out that IBM's yields at the time he visited were only 16%, and somehow this was still better than how ATI was doing at the time, where having a design finalized by either company at this stage was equivalent to the luck needed to get a legendary gotcha pull on your first spin. At this point, the amount of dud consoles that Microsoft had would make almost any other electronics manufacturer delay the launch, or at least hesitate before pulling the trigger, because the potential for everything to go wrong would bankrupt them. Sony's own issues developing the PS3 were why that console got pushed into a late 2006 release. But Microsoft is rich. So rich that Microsoft is usually the point of comparison you make to call something else rich. They could just eat any cost that was thrown at them, so they moved forward with the plan despite the 360's risk. Internally, Microsoft thought the consoles at launch would have a yield rate around 93 to 94%, 94%. But after the launch, and as 2006 wore on, an internal email from March still continued to emphasize a focus on the bone pile and maximizing yields. But even years into the console's life, Microsoft never got to ideal numbers with that original 360 model, and according to some sources, return rates were reaching like 8.8%. Microsoft was more than aware there was a problem, that it was widespread, and yet still they stonewalled customers for years, saying that Xbox 360's completely breaking down were isolated incidents, while consistently sticking to that pre-written line of below the standard return rate of 3 to 5%. Even worse, Microsoft was also aware of certain latent issues. Those are problems that are expected to cause a bunch of consoles to fail at around the same time somewhere down the line, which would cause a major spike in returns when the bird came home to roost. The 360s were essentially time bombs, and it was speculated that latent issues could account for up to 50% of all console defects. The latent issues were something they actually managed to catch during testing, so they knew that with these consoles already shipped out, that months later, when return rates should have been hitting a new low, they instead would get a Logan Paul redemption arc where they come back bigger than ever with results that were about as disastrous. Microsoft knew there was an issue, and to their credit, were replacing consoles when they red-rigged. So why the hell did they spend the whole time saying fuck all about it? Well, basically, they said nothing because they had nothing to say. They didn't know what was wrong.
We didn't have all the answers at that time.
We were trying to figure this out. We have a heat problem. Is the solder in key components in the motherboard, is it cracking up and drying out and we're losing that connection? We just couldn't figure it out.
Everything inside the 360 was basically just crammed in there. The shell for the console was made before the internals were done, and the guts themselves were rushed and complicated, meaning any number of things could go wrong. At this point, the 360 looked less like it was inhaling and more like it was choking on galaxy gas. As issues mounted and Microsoft saw no progress on solving the issue, they made some tough choices. For one, the Zephyr was a new motherboard Microsoft was working on to make the 360 cheaper to produce, but in 2006, they put a hold on the development to put more engineers on solving the Sherlock mystery of the Red Ring of Death. And biggest of all, in the start of 2007, Microsoft completely halted the production of new Xbox 360s until they could figure out what the issue was, a halt that lasted for half a goddamn year. Microsoft was cushioned, though, from a shortage because they'd actually built too many consoles at this point and had stock that they had to work through, buying them time to properly debug the Xbox 360 2 years after they should have. All of this leading to them publicly eating crow in the public square when they actually figured out what caused the Red Ring of Death. And key to answering the question of what caused the Red Ring, I think, is asking what didn't cause it. Because in the vacuum of Microsoft's silence, a lot of theories arose to try and explain it. For the longest time, nobody could pin it to one single issue. In Takahashi's 2008 article, he says there were several different problems. One specifically cited was our old friend, the ATI GPU, getting so hot that it would warp the motherboard and put stress on solder bumps. And this would be in line with the overheating theories that people had at the time, where speculation both internally at Microsoft and externally in the public led to a theory around something called lead-free soldering. Now, I love lead as much as the next content creator. The more people that consume it, the bigger my target audience gets. But during the 360's development, the EU set a new legal standard that banned soldering with lead that would go into effect in July 2006. And since 2006 was the first full calendar year on the market for the 360, and they planned to do a simultaneous global launch, including Europe, they had to future-proof the console by using lead-free soldering inside it. In an interview, Peter Moore mentioned the theory coming up during internal testing. They knew the issue was heat-related, and they theorized that the weaker lead-free soldering made them more brittle and easier to break. Dean even cited several instances where Microsoft employees had called lead-free soldering a major issue when making the console, mostly when it came to overheating. And there is some truth here. Lead soldering has more give than lead-free, meaning it's able to absorb impacts and handle abuse better. So, electronics with lead-free soldering inside them may have more fragile solder bumps, ones that are more likely to crack if an Xbox gets dropped or punched by a raging 12-year-old, causing that console to die. But that explanation is one of human error, not a core system flaw. And come on, I already said this is the part of the video where I tell you what did not cause the red ring, so you can probably guess that it wasn't overheating. And understanding how we know that partly comes down to knowing what the red ring itself even meant. As we know it, the Red Ring of Death was 3 red lights. Specifically, 3. A lot of people even took aesthetic issue with it being called a ring because it wasn't a full circle. And this matters because the amount of red lights shining on your Xbox actually all indicate different problems with your console. A single light shining is the Universal Error Message, or UEM, and it would give you an actual error code on your TV screen that indicated what component inside the Xbox has failed. The three lights of death was a general hardware failure, where the console had no idea what was wrong with it, just that it sucked and was completely bricked. And ironically, the most menacing looking one, the four lights, was the least important. It meant you had an issue with like your AV cables. You just probably plugged in the HDMI cable wrong. It's kind of anticlimactic for how threatening it is. But the two light error message was specifically reserved for if the console overheats, at which point the 360 would automatically shut itself off to avoid damaging its parts and run its fans at full speed until it cooled off enough. Overheating had its own 2 red light error code and protocol to follow, where the 3 red lights meant a different issue entirely. There are sensors inside the console that detect if the temperature is too hot and that shut off the machine before the Xbox can damage itself. Furthermore, a heatsink is a doodad that cools down processors by dissipating heat. There were 2 heatsinks inside the Xbox 360, one for the CPU and GPU each. And there are examples of people completely removing these heatsinks from the console and the 360's overheating failsafe still activating as intended. And even if we just assume every single failsafe and redundancy didn't work and that the console still overheated in spite of that, that would not be enough to cause the general hardware failure that the red ring represented. Source? God said so. It's physically impossible for a 360 to melt itself. Soft solder at the lowest end melts at around 90 degrees Celsius or 190 degrees Fahrenheit. And in even the most primitive and dogshit versions of the 360, the GPU just barely passed that minimum threshold, targeting a temperature of 97 degrees Celsius in the GPU, where the mass-produced models never reached 90 degrees. That console might have overheated. Solder bumps might have broken due to human error, which caused 360s to brick. But they were not the systemic cause of the red ring. So, if not that, then what? Microsoft's answer for 14 years was as follows. Yeah, so basically that. In their 2007 open letter, they'd only admitted that they'd done an oopsie-whoopsie fucky-wucky, fixed the consoles they could, then stopped talking about it. Even when Dean Takahashi reached out to Microsoft for comment on how true the stuff he was reporting in his Red Ring article was, Microsoft said that everything he was pushing was all rumors that had already been addressed. And sure, in years past, people on the Xbox team at the time reminisced what a trial that was and what they learned. But in 2015, Peter Moore said that on some level, they knew that this was a thermal issue. And it wasn't until 2021 that Microsoft's official answer changed from nothing to something. In the almighty 6-part Xbox docuseries, they had an entire episode dedicated to the Red Ring of Death, where during their months of rigorous dead-end testing, they finally had a breakthrough when they realized that the issue wasn't on the 360's motherboard, but rather in the components themselves. One guess on which part of the console it was. Be sure to type your answer in the comments, think long and hard about it. Okay, are you ready? Yeah, it was the ATI GPU. Now delete your comment. According to Microsoft, the issue was thermal, but not because of overheating. The solder connections in the GPU were breaking, but it wasn't because it was getting to the temperature of the sun in there. Rather, because of temperature fluctuations. Think of it like this. Regular Joe Schmo comes back home from his soul-sucking 9-to-5 and is looking for some release in the form of his game box. He turns on his 360 and hops on the game just to have his soul crushed even further by children who are better at Call of Duty than him. While the console is running, the GPU gets really hot from playing the video game. Then, a few hours later, Joe has had enough torture, so he turns off the Xbox and goes to bed. When the console is turned off, it begins to rapidly cool down when it's not in use. And when a console owner inevitably does this over and over again, turning the machine on and off, hot then cold, bouncing between these extremes so often can put enough stress on the solder bumps to the point that they break. And then a brilliant little piece of PR, Microsoft managed to flip this into people just loving their Xbox 360 so much that their affection for the thing ends up destroying it. So that's it, right? ATI made a bad GPU because they were rushed, making it vulnerable to temperature fluctuations. Well, I mean, yeah, partly. That was the most common reason the Red Ring happened from a system point of view, but why was it like that? I'm gonna be so real with y'all, a lot of these are questions I wouldn't have even thought to ask if it weren't for a video by one RIP Felix. A 360 story, the Red Ring of Death, and the 7th generation console war. This video is comprehensive in its coverage. It's very technical, and I highly recommend it if you're into that side of the stuff, and it brought a lot of things to my attention I wouldn't even know to look for without it. It's very information dense, but I'm gonna do my best to communicate the broad strokes here. The first thing you gotta know is that solder balls are tiny, like like really tiny, and there is a microscopic amount of space between them and all the other shit around it. This space is then filled up with an epoxy resin called underfill, which fills in the gaps of air between the bumps to cushion it. It's like how you put packing peanuts or bubble wrap in a package when you're shipping something fragile. That way it doesn't move around or break during shipping. Underfill does basically the same thing for the internals of electronics. That way, if you drop your console, laptop, phone, or whatever, the underfill cushions the tiny parts inside from impact like an airbag does for your stupid little bones in a car crash, which helps extend the life expectancy of electronics. Temperature fluctuations, when extreme enough, can soften certain kinds of underfill to the point where they're no longer providing support to the solder bumps, making the underfill pretty much useless. It's basically like if you were to melt the packing peanuts. Do not try that, you will create napalm. Follow for more Linus Tech Tips. And Felix posits that there is a much more core issue going on with this whole thing, and that people in the know of consumer electronics and how they're built could tell that this whole thing stemmed from a controversy called Bumpgate. Tricky Dick strikes again. Not the kind of Bumpgate that keeps livestock in, no. As I understand it, Bumpgate is a controversy that centers around the hardware manufacturer NVIDIA, where back in the day, they shipped out a large amount of chips that were defective and ended up in a lot of name brand electronics that ended up failing in droves from around 2006 to 2008, the same window of time when the red ring of death failures were at their peak. And the truth is, all chips are doomed to die and no dogs go to heaven, but usually this process takes decades, at which point most people will have moved on to new technology and forget about their old broken computer, or be too dead to notice that their computer is broken. The thing is, NVIDIA's chips were breaking much faster than they were supposed to, because the solder bumps inside the chip were taking a lot of stress from fluctuating temperatures. They weren't literally melting themselves, but the solder bumps were under a ton of stress from heating up during use, then rapidly cooling down when turned off. The underfill meant to support the bumps with softening, which meant the bumps took on the weight of the world all by themselves, causing them to weaken over time and eventually crack. This repeated issue with NVIDIA's chips specifically earned it the Bumpgate name. A lot of these machines with these chips inside them were ticking time bombs. They could take years to fail, so you wouldn't notice anything immediately, but they would still shit the bed much sooner than they were supposed to. And in the most extreme cases, a PC could fail right after you got the machine. Sound familiar? The consequences for NVIDIA were a catastrophe, as their chips were in tons of name-brand electronics. NVIDIA faced a class-action lawsuit with a dedicated NVIDIAsettlement.com webpage for those affected. Hewlett-Packard, or HP, had to create a warranty guide for their Pavilion notebook laptops, which contained faulty NVIDIA parts. 10 different Dell products were impacted by defective NVIDIA chips, and perhaps most consequentially, Apple was getting heat, lol, for having NVIDIA chips in several computers of theirs that failed, including their flagship MacBooks. Apple and NVIDIA have had bad blood ever since. And I don't know about you, but I have never hated someone so much that I literally became a hardware manufacturer. In 2008, Apple bought a processor company for close to $300 million and has resorted to making their own chips themselves since 2010. It's perhaps not directly because of the blunder with NVIDIA, but the timing is certainly something. Now, you might be reasonably asking, alright, Kwite, that's cool and all, but what the fuck does this got to do with Microsoft? I mean, NVIDIA wasn't even one of the companies that helped Microsoft make their chips. Hell, they had a falling out over parts in the original Xbox that resulted in a lawsuit, which made Microsoft avoid NVIDIA like the plague when building the 360. For NVIDIA's part, they played coy for a while on what machines were defective and whose fault it actually was, but they couldn't play 20 questions forever, and they had to own up to it in some way somewhere down the line eventually. And at several points where NVIDIA said they took responsibility, they had also roped in one of their manufacturing partners, the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, or TSMC, as having worked on the faulty chips alongside them. They would later walk back the strongest of the language to say that they weren't blaming TSMC, but still kind of implying that they were at least a co-conspirator in the creation of NVIDIA's faulty chips, and that they were handling parts of the process that NVIDIA just wasn't. It was a soft, hey, we're not saying it's their fault, but like, we're not saying it's not, without having to fully commit to it. Something which TSMC has been pretty quiet about in the wake of. And it is possible that the problems with NVIDIA's products weren't entirely their fault, and that the information needed to know whose fault it was just isn't out there. And to understand why it's missing, we need to have a very exciting discussion about supply chains. Woo! I don't know if you know, but semiconductors make the world go round, and Nvidia's partner, TSMC, is the biggest producer of semiconductors in the world. The shortage of silicon exports from them is responsible for the shortage of all consumer electronics that we saw during the pandemic. TSMC quite literally works and supplies for everybody. And you know who else they were supplying silicon with in 2004? Yep, you guessed it, fucking ATI! Semiconductors are most commonly made out of silicon, so I'm gonna be using those words interchangeably. Let's get visual. So, the silicon used to make chips starts here at TSMC, and they have a partner company that they work with that's also at this stage of the supply chain. Next, TSMC sends these parts out to all the companies they supply for, both Nvidia and ATI in this case, where ATI and Nvidia are the chip designers. They make the actual chips that go inside the electronics. These chips, as well as a bunch of other parts, then go to the assemblers, the guys who put all the pieces together. And finally, the assembled product goes to the big dogs like Microsoft, who put their name on the product and sell directly to the customer. So if the defects in chips started because of a mistake at TSMC or a company they work with, then it makes sense that the same kind of failures could be found in chips made by two completely separate companies if they were both being supplied by TSMC. This being Nvidia with the bump gate failures and ATI with the red ring. The PS3 even had a GPU made by Nvidia and had a similar problem to the red ring, where consoles bricked in inexplicable ways that they called the yellow line of death, though it is talked about a lot less than the red ring. And that's because, even if the rot started at the root, and it was a mistake made at TSMC's stage of production that led to issues down the line for everybody, every link in the accursed supply chain should still be doing their own tests. That way they can try and catch something the last guy might have fucked up. The PS3 got a lot less flack for their console failures and were able to practically bury the issue, largely because it happened a lot less. Sony took a lot more time than Microsoft to build the hardware inside the PS3, and they even delayed the console several times, something Microsoft was flat out opposed to do with their machine. Sony built and tested the PS3 much more rigorously. Meanwhile, the 360 was rushed through development, and potential issues were ignored in favor of getting it out faster, with the actual testing processes that were in place being less than stellar on their own. Microsoft cut a lot of corners in order to get the 360 out on schedule, and probably missed a lot of preventable shit because of that. But let's say that Microsoft could trace all the issues back to TSMC. Hell, they might have even done that. But even then, even if they could prove that it wasn't their fault that all this happened, throwing TSMC under the bus is a fucking terrible idea, and there's a good chance that's why we never heard about it. You would be killing your connection with, like, the biggest supplier of microprocessors in consumer electronics. Microsoft, as well as every other hardware manufacturer, needs them. So even if it wasn't entirely Microsoft's fault, the egg has to go on their face so they don't make TSMC mad. Like, Bumpgate only publicly made the rounds in regards to Nvidia being blamed, and was really hard to find articles with the specifics on. And it took years for Microsoft to acknowledge that the issues with Bumpgate were similar to what caused the red ring. I've tried to piece together how Bumpgate may have had a wider effect in layman's terms here. I hope I did a decent job. But in this case, with the red ring, no matter who's at fault, the responsibility fell to Microsoft. They're the ones selling the product, they're the one collecting the revenue, they put their name on the box, so they are the ones who have to take it on the chin. All in all, the rot really might just stem from the root. The fall off. Shortly after the Red Ring became a closed book, Peter Moore decided that he'd had enough of all this Xbox console craziness, and he left his position running Xbox to go head up EA Sports. And I mean, this is the top position at Xbox. This matters. So, who replaced him? The former president of EA, I guess? Yeah, Don Matrick came through. They traded jobs like Pokemon. And oh boy, did Don Matrick rock the boat over at Xbox. He is probably the man that people most commonly pin as the culprit for ruining Xbox. And before we get into all that, one thing that I can say for certain about Don Matrick is that his reign at Xbox was characterized by a single theme.
He really wanted the Xbox to be a product that could reach a broader and broader market.
Sales, baby! It's all about the reach! By the Shaker Cup. How do we get bigger? How do we expand? How do we make more people into gamers? And I'm saying that facetiously, but to be fair, that's very in line with the original aim of the Xbox 360, as it was outlined in the 330-300. But when people hear this type of talk in regards to Don Matrick, it leaves a bad taste in their mouth. understandably. And that's usually because they think of his work on the Xbox One. But as tempting as it is to pin the blame of Xbox's downfall entirely on the Don, RICO charges are going to be hard to make stick here. He didn't just work on the Xbox One. He was the head of Xbox for over half a decade, 6 years, from 2007 to 2013. He oversaw the 360 for most of its life and was massively influential in the success of that console. He got the Xbox 360 from 10 million units sold to 80 million units sold, and he grew Xbox Live membership 8-fold from 6 million to 48 million. And you could say that might be a thing that would have happened regardless as the 360's life cycle went on, but he was the guy. So in like his own corporate capitalist hellhole way, he was good at something over there.
When I joined Microsoft, Steve Ballmer said Xbox needs to have more than a true product life cycle. And to do that, we need to place bets, we need to move into new categories, we need to innovate and create new hit products, both in gaming and in entertainment.
From the start, the name of the game was thinking broader. I'm sure it was something that Don had his own ideas and ambitions for, but it was ultimately a mandate he got from the top. Steve Ballmer told him what to do, and it was the Don's job to deliver. I'm realizing I pronounce his name the same way I do the Pokemon character. One big swing they took was turning the Xbox 360 into a truly multimedia machine. At launch, the 360 was able to play DVDs. You'd hope so, because the whole thing was running on them. But unfortunately, you did need that separate player for the HD DVDs. Greatness was almost achieved. But on the 1-year anniversary of the 360's launch, Xbox Live Video launched, which let people spend Microsoft points, not dollars, to download HD TV from major networks like MTV, CBS, Comedy Central. It was one of the first devices that was already present in the living room that offered that kind of service, with other competitors at the time like Akimbo, something that I'm sure you're hearing about for the first time now, fizzling out into bankruptcy just 2 years later. They used to be in the conversation. Meanwhile, the 360 kept its head up and was pioneering digital HD movie rentals. Another thing, it was one of the first to. Just a few years later, as Netflix was looking to expand their streaming business, Microsoft inked a deal with them to create a native app for Netflix on Xbox. This again made the 360 one of the first devices whose natural habitat was the living room to have HD streaming capabilities. We take HD streaming for granted now because, like, my own videos are rendered in that quality. But I remember back in the day when 240p videos on YouTube took like 7 minutes to buffer on the most expensive internet you could buy. And Microsoft managed to even lock down Netflix for a full year of exclusivity on Xbox before they were allowed to flirt with Sony. Smart TVs, Fire Sticks, and all this other malarkey didn't exist yet. The 360 was the machine with processing power that had already made its way into the living room. It was in many ways fulfilling the stated mission goal of the Xbox brand at its birth, competing with Sony to be a Trojan horse in the living room. It was very skeevy though that for the first 8 years that Netflix was on Xbox, you needed not just a Netflix subscription, but also an Xbox Live Gold membership. What an incredibly consumer-friendly practice. After that, though, Microsoft added a roster of heavy-hitting multimedia apps to the Xbox Live's offerings. You had social media like Facebook and Twitter, both coming to Xbox. YouTube, in a match made in heaven, found its way to the 360 and probably got played on a lot of TV screens for the first time ever. Other major streaming services like Hulu and HBO Go joined Netflix on the console. Zune was there, but it wasn't good. The amount and variety of services available on the Xbox 360 continued to grow until in 2012, people were spending more time on their console consuming music, TV, and movies than was being spent playing video games on it. The Xbox brand was finally a tiny piece of gut bacteria in the belly of the beast known as white suburbia. Xbox letting these parasites feed off the back of its online empire was really a major step in streaming services becoming legitimate alternatives to cable programming, because it gave those services access to a device connected to the TV en masse across the world. And I mean, yeah, that's all well and good. The Xbox can play Netflix now. But as far as expanding the gamer tent goes, I've barely mentioned the biggest fish in the game. Yeah, I believe they call this a revolution or something. When the Wii dropped, it bombed, but like in a cool Saddam kind of way because it was really big. Nintendo went from coming dead last of the big three in sales with the GameCube to being front of the line with the Wii, overtaking both the PS3 and Xbox 360 in total sales by May 2008. This little white brick got your mom to play video games.
Yeah, how do you know?
And it did it through the power of the gimmick, trademark. Instead of using a weird boomerang-looking standard controller, the thing you used to manipulate this box looked like a TV remote. But that made it immediately more familiar to normal non-game playing folk. And the appeal was twofold. It was genius. It made the controls of playing games intuitive for newcomers. No pressing button, just waving the wand. It's so simple, the whole family can play. And now that you have to actually move more than just your phalanges to play the game, under the legal definition of the Obama administration, gaming now counts as a physical activity. Thanks for helping my parents get me a Wii, Barack. The pack-in game for the Wii literally has sports in the title, so parents can buy one for their kids guilt-free. And it also helped that it was the cheapest console on the market. Just a generational run over here. Naturally, the other guys wanted a piece of the casual gamer pie, but they were playing catch-up. The Wii was built on motion controls, while the PS3 and Xbox 360 were gonna have to duct tape it on after the fact. Sony's plan was to just ape the Wiimote straight up. Huzzah! This dildo now also lets you flail around in your room like a dork, but now on a more expensive box, where Xbox response did actually try to push it a step further. Don Matrick thought, if the barrier to entry is the standard controller, then why not just get rid of the controller entirely? And Microsoft had been experimenting with 3D camera and motion tracking tech on the Xbox for a few years already, and when the Wii exploded on the market, they were like, alright, yeah, let's fast track that. And out bounces the Kinect. The marketing was centered around you being the controller. And the pitch was basically trying to hit on everything that the Wii appealed to. It's a casual experience, it turns games into a physical activity, and it's super accessible. They were also trying to tell us that you could talk to this little prick Milo who was framed as essentially a fully functioning intelligent AI. That was a complete lie. That motherfucker was dumber than the AI we got now. And that's saying something. Have you seen those character AI chat logs? To this day, I have no idea what they were trying to do with that concept. It was never gonna work. And I'm talking about Milo here, not the Kinect, because this thing could move units. It is impossible to find footage of the original Xbox's launch in Times Square because the Kinect launch in Times Square completely buries it in search. The Kinect moved 8 million units in the space of 60 days, which set a Guinness World Record as the fastest-selling consumer electronic of all time. The best-selling Xbox 360 game of all time was Kinect Adventures. That's over Minecraft. That's over Halo. That's over every Call of Duty. That's over GTA 5. Important to that information is that it was a pack-in game for the 360 Kinect bundle, and it's the only reason why I own it, but it also does show you how hard they were pushing that shit. And at least for me, between the ages of 10 and 11, the almighty power of the gimmick reigned supreme once again. I remember as a kid booting up Kinect Adventures and any number of other generic-ass games for the Kinect, and the magic I felt where whenever I moved, my guy in the game moved in a way vaguely similar. Oh, dude, fucking euphoria. Except for Sonic Free Riders. That shit blew ass, and hand on my heart, I genuinely flushed that game down a toilet. And on its own isolated merits, the Kinect was a genuinely cool little doohickey that people use for all kinds of stuff even today. For some reason, that includes a bunch of ghost hunting shenanigans. I don't understand it, but you do you. People have used this thing to create live feeds of them in Minecraft, and several medical applications for the technology exists, like stroke recovery, and in a 2014 proposal written in ScienceDirect.com, it recommended using Kinect Adventures as a learning tool for kids with autism, because they just seemed to really enjoy it, and it was effective. I think I just figured out why I was so into it back then, which is all well and good, but the group of people the Kinect was doing the least for was the core gaming audience of Xbox. And a lot of that stems from the fact that most Kinect games kind of suck. As exciting as the Kinect's tracking was in concept, it was not very good, and so games made for the Kinect did not control well, even if designed very, very lovingly. Steel Battalion, you deserve justice. Kinect Sports and Adventures were novelties. You could play them at a dinner party or some shit, but they did not have the lasting power of a Wii Sports. And meanwhile, established brand-named offerings made for the Kinect were just not good either. Sonic Free Riders? Ass. And probably killed the Sonic Riders spin-off series forever. Kinect Star Wars? Ass. Except for that one Han Solo song, which itself was just a riff on one of the only kind of worth your time Kinect games, Dance Central. The Kinect's functionality with most games was limited almost entirely to voice commands, which were usually clunky enough to use on their own. In Skyrim, there's an optional setting where you could verbally say a dragon shout out loud, say, Fusro Da, and the game would send the magic fart at an enemy like you had pressed the button, but you had said the words instead. That was about as in-depth as it ever got for most games. One of the problems was big budget developers just didn't want to make games for for it. Their existing franchises had been optimized over decades to work best on a controller. So with a lack of games that appealed to and satisfied the core gamer demographic, a lack of interest in the Kinect as a whole was inevitable. In between the Xbox's ever-growing focus on multimedia and attempts to capture the mythical casual gaming market, it felt to many like the Xbox's core commitment to being the best place to play and make games was wavering. And it's almost symbolic that fans' faith in what used to be Microsoft's strongest pillar of this commitment began to waver too. After releasing Halo Reach in 2010, Bungie had fulfilled the contractual obligations they had to Microsoft to develop 2 more games after Halo 3, and they set out to make their own way, leaving Microsoft with the rights to the franchise and the job of choosing the new arbiters of Halo's future. So they formed a new development studio called 343 Industries that was tasked with not just developing new Halo games, but also overseeing the franchise as a whole. Their first entry to the series was Halo 4, set to release in November 2012. Hype was through the roof. In the last 2 Halo games, there was no Master Chief, but now the Chief's back! It was a numbered entry, and up till now, even those non-Chief starring games, for most people, Halo has not had a bad game yet, so they were excited for what was next. So, Halo 4 drops, and it releases to rave reviews across the board, with 8 and 9s out of 10s all over the place. It matched Halo 3's milestone of hitting 1 million people playing at the same time in the first 24 hours of release, and it made $300 million in its opening week, setting a franchise record. But there were discrepancies. Halo stayed in the top 3 most played games on Xbox Live until Halo Reach came out, and Reach lasted a full year in that top 3 after its release. Halo 4 lasted 2 months, and I don't think that's because the game was bad per se. I personally had a lot of fun with it when I was 12, but to many it just didn't feel like the Halo they knew. It had included new things like custom loadouts that more modern shooters like Call of Duty were using. Where Halo used to be the trend-setting shooter, now it felt like they were chasing the trends. The art style was also radically different, and it felt to many that something was simply missing in Bungie's absence, you know, just the vibes. That sauce that set Halo apart and made it Halo. Like, this isn't a bad game, but is it a good Halo game? But hey, you know what? We could go down that rabbit hole for ages, and that's being a bit too doomer for my tastes. Halo 4 was objectively a success, and the 7th generation of consoles had been going on for 7 years now, much longer than was normal at the time. Nintendo had already dropped a new console in the form of the Wii U, which meant that Sony and Microsoft just had to have announcements around the corner. So before we look at what comes next, let's take stock of how the 7th generation went down. Just to get this out of the way, the Wii cleaned house here, selling over 10 million more consoles than the second place PS3, and that's for a number of reasons that mostly boil down to that Nintendo was fighting a completely different type of battle than Sony and Microsoft, and also it was cheaper. The Wii marked the moment that Nintendo stepped out of the race for the most powerful machine and using an unconventional offering as the console's selling point. Now, just looking at the stats, it feels safe to say that the PS3 and Xbox 360 were pretty neck and neck, but that despite releasing a year later than the 360 and at a higher price point, the PS3 overcame all the odds and beat the Xbox in worldwide sales. And that's objectively true, no getting around that, but it's only part of the story. The largest sales gap here is in Japan, where Sony outsold Microsoft 10-1. They also had a lead in pretty much every other market, Europe, Canada, Australia, except for a very crucial one, the United States. World's main character, baby. And here at home, the 360 sold nearly 10 million more units than the PlayStation 3. One thing Microsoft unequivocally had in the American market was the home field advantage. They had a sizable majority chunk of the console market, minus the Wii. If you were American, your senile aunt was not calling just any video game related thing the Wii just because it was the most popular. They called it an Xbox because that was the game box of the era that permeated the culture. And honestly, even if Sony managed to edge out Microsoft in the end, the paradigm shift here from the last generation is quite frankly absurd. Sony went from being bigger than all the competition combined to the Wii passing it and the Xbox turning the core gaming industry into a 2-superpower world, which meant that going into the next generation, it wasn't just competitive. Microsoft had a real chance to win here. They just had to continue to build on their successful playbook and stick to the plan.
Sorry, guys.
People eagerly salivated for news on the PS4 and Xbox 720. We really did not have a better name for it back then, please forgive us. And as time passed, word on the next-gen Xbox leaks ranged from odd to very concerning. Reports had been coming in that the next box would have an always online requirement, where if you didn't have an internet connection, you wouldn't be able to play games on the machine. Now, this was only a rumor at the time, but tensions were absolutely stoked when an employee at Microsoft tweeted on the topic of always online, seeming to dismiss people's concern with it. I really don't have time to go in all the little details of this interaction, like it's hard to tell if the guy was joking or being genuine, but either way, it definitely was not a comfort to people who were concerned about not having stable enough internet to play even single-player games on the next Xbox, especially when Microsoft hadn't themselves yet said anything to confirm or deny the rumors. Well, gamers like me would finally get to see at least a taste of what the future of Xbox would look like when they announced the new console in May 2013. Don Matrick waltzes up on the stage with that very unique smirk of his, and I mean that in a neutral manner, and he tells us what the next generation is. The new Xbox is a smaller number than last time.
Introducing Xbox One.
I mean, well, maybe it'll grow on me. What you got, Microsoft?
TV, watch TV. TV, sports, TV, television, TV, television,
television.
Call of Duty.
TV. The new Xbox is a VCR. They talked about maybe 3 games during that presentation, and it took 20 minutes to get to the first one. And it was FIFA. The next game was pitched as a hybrid between video game and TV. It was called Quantum Break, and I do have some love in my heart for it because it was made by Remedy. But the third game was Call of Duty. And the conference ended immediately after. Yeah, it is not looking good, man. We might be cooked. Basically, nobody was happy with that presentation. The gaming audience who tuned into the conference were told they should watch TV instead. The employees, who had been tirelessly working on the Xbox One for years up to this point, thought that the presentation shat on everything they'd been working for and completely misrepresented what they wanted the console to be. Phil Spencer came out 6 years after the fact to say, yeah, it wasn't so good, and even the official Xbox documentary called it garbage. Between all the moves that Microsoft had made at the end of the 7th generation, and now this, it felt like Microsoft put the cart before the horse and were just hopelessly out of touch. Like they heard that people were using their 360 to watch TV and movies more than they were using it to play games, and they thought, well, I guess we gotta make the box more about movies. But the thing is, people used their Xbox to do those things because they already had one. And they already had one because they bought an Xbox to play games on it. It got even worse when a few weeks later that they confirmed a version of the always online requirement was real. Sure, you can play your games offline, but only for 24 hours at a time. After that, if you don't connect to the internet, you can't play games offline until you do. Even the single-player ones. And better yet, Microsoft was also putting restrictions on sharing used games. A physical game you purchased would be tied to your Xbox Live account and could only be traded in at specific retailers at the game publisher's discretion. And if you wanted to transfer a game license digitally to other people, it was just hopelessly convoluted, man. Even if there was some good in it, I fucking can't parse it. So Microsoft's ethos during this whole generation was basically, fuck anyone who lives out in the sticks or who wanted to sell a game on eBay. In the blog post announcing this, they worded it like, because every Xbox One owner has broadband? Yeah, well, what if they fucking don't?
Fortunately, we have a product for people who aren't able to get some form of connectivity. It's called Xbox 360.
I don't think I've ever seen a console try to make their target audience smaller. I know I'm basically yelling at the sky right now because this is over a decade old, but this shit had me distraught as a 13-year-old. I was an Xbox diehard, and here they were, spitting in the face of the brand loyalty I had blindly given them as a preteen. E3 was less than a week after this announcement, and it was a bloodbath. Xbox had to earn back the trust of gamers by showing a slate of really good stuff, but they'd shot themselves in the foot by announcing the always online thing right beforehand. Microsoft did have some big reveals like a new Halo coming soon, but it just didn't matter. Look at what Sony fucking did to them, man.
This is how you share your games on PS4.
Thanks.
As an Xbox fanboy, that shit made me sick to my stomach. And Sony just kept digging their thumb in the bullet wound by saying that the PS4 had no online requirements.
PS4 won't require you to check in online periodically.
And when each of their presentations ended, oh my god, the prices, man. The prices!
21 markets around the world at $499 in the US, and 499 euros in European markets.
The PS4 had its PR docket handed it to them by Microsoft on a silver platter, all capped off by the fact that it was $100 cheaper. And you want to know why? Because the Xbox One refused to launch without the Kinect. Some shit no one wanted and no developer ended up making games for. It was so over, dude. We were done for. It's like Microsoft and Sony had completely traded places from last time. So many of the blunders that gave Microsoft an opening to take Sony down a peg the last generation, they'd suddenly decided, let's do that ourselves. After E3, they doubled back on the online requirements and all the used game restrictions like a week after E3, but it was too little too late. And as much as I wanted to pretend that I was still like fighting with myself internally, I already knew I was gonna ask for a PS4 that Christmas. It was cheaper, so my parents might actually say yes if I did. Not 2 weeks after he posted that apology, the Xbox One hadn't even launched yet, and Don Matrick decides to jump ship before the port's even in sight. The irony of this whole thing is that a lot of the bets Microsoft made on the Xbox One wouldn't even necessarily end up being wrong. They planned on an all-digital future being inevitable and created features that centered around that. A lot of the wrong features, but you know, there was something at the start. But even if I give them props in the theoretical, at that time, at that price, and with that marketing, Xbox just made their own grave. The launch rolls around and I have a choice to make where the only Xbox I've bought since the 360 is 55 more Xbox 360s. I did count, that's the exact amount I own. Sales from the jump were heavily skewed towards Sony, and they were just cleaning house out there and continued to do so for the rest of the generation. Phil Spencer became head of Xbox in March 2014 and desperately tried to right the ship on the Xbox One, where only a few months after he took office, a cheaper Xbox One was released that did not include the Kinect, which was a good idea because not even Microsoft was making games for that thing anymore, and it got discontinued in 2017. The biggest exclusive launch the Xbox One had was probably when Halo 5 came out in October 2015, and it suffered a lot of the same criticisms as Halo 4. It's like not a bad game on its own merits, but for longtime fans, what about this plays like Halo? The gameplay was a far cry from what a lot of fans had come to expect, and it further harmed people's faith in the franchise. And in general, Xbox exclusive lineup this generation faltered hard compared to their last console, while Sony just kept the heat coming. Like, let's do a little thought experiment. I want you to try and think of games that were exclusive to the Xbox One that were all-timers. Classic. Games that are icons unto themselves. Forza Motorsport? I mean, if you like racing games, I hear they're consistently good. Fair enough. I mean, Sea of Thieves, maybe. I guess it took a minute to get where it's at, but you know, it did get there. You know where else it got to? The PlayStation 5. Meanwhile, Sony had close to yearly heaters back to back. Bloodborne, God of War, Uncharted 4, Spider-Man, Horizon Zero Dawn, if you're into that sort of thing, Death Stranding, Final Fantasy VII Remake, Ghost of Tsushima, and more. I don't even know why I'm crying about this. I had a PS4. I got to play this shit. This was the slate of games I got to enjoy. But the Xbox was my first love, and seeing them get slaughtered like this is heartbreaking. By the end of the generation, the PS4 had outsold the Xbox One 2-1. The 58 million units the Xbox One sold is certainly respectable, but the PS4 moved over 100 million again. And that brings us to the current era of Xboxes on the market. Our options are the Xbox Series X and S. It's like Xbox became allergic to easy-to-understand branding over the last decade. Pick your poison, the fridge or the subwoofer. Though, to be fair, I actually do want the unironic Xbox Series fridge. Microsoft has spent several years in this generation and the last one just eating up a fuck ton of companies and acquisitions. Ones like Bethesda and infamously Activision, which made some think that they were trying to make a huge push into gaming once again. And you know, they have in a way, just not how a lot of people were expecting. People thought they were going to come with a huge lineup of banger exclusives, but the few exclusives you actually hear about that come out for the Xbox Series have been met with mixed reception, like Starfield, a downright disdain and hatred like Redfall, which led to its developer Arcane Austin getting shuttered. They made Prey, man! How the fuck did you do that? But even when Microsoft has a bona fide hit by self-admission like Hi-Fi Rush, a game they said exceeded every metric they had to be considered a success, the studio behind it, Tango Gameworks, still got sacked. And that studio and franchise was only saved from the brink of death by a surprise buyout from Krafton, the guys who published PUBG of all things. And even if you ignore all that and say that Hi-Fi Rush was like a real gem on the Xbox, yeah, it's no longer an Xbox exclusive. It's on the PlayStation 5 now. Several former Xbox exclusives have gotten this treatment. And the way certain things are getting talked about, there's a good chance that no titles are off limits to being made multi-platform. Something about Halo on the PlayStation, as little as I should care about it happening, feels sacrilegious, man. I don't like to see it. It feels like instead of making great games that you can only find and play on the Xbox, Microsoft is further and further edged into just making their games available in as many places as possible, both in price and availability, attempting to actualize that digital future they envisioned a decade ago. Xbox Game Pass is currently currently the premier gaming offer from Microsoft these days. A monthly subscription for access to a library of tons of honestly great games that you can download to your PC or console to play, and is honestly a pretty good-ass deal if you take advantage of the variety of games often enough. You can also stream them to any device with a screen on it via cloud gaming. Just 2 weeks ago, Xbox dropped a new commercial named "This is an Xbox." An Xbox is an Xbox. A smart TV is an Xbox. Your phone is an Xbox. Your laptop too. Whatever you're watching this video on right now is probably also an Xbox. Driving home that the Xbox as a brand is becoming less and less of a place in the home where your favorite game machine is hooked up to a TV, but rather a chemical in the air that you can find wherever you are as long as you have a screen on you. There is a little mixed messaging on if it's literally every screen, as some higher ups at Microsoft say the PS5 and Nintendo Switch might even count as an Xbox and they should have Game Pass on them. But then just a few days after that comment, Phil Spencer says that it's not in Microsoft's plans and that they want people who have an Xbox to feel like it was worth getting invested in, trying to make it sound like Xbox still cares about their hardware business. But things are looking grim for Xbox Series models right now. As some analysts say, the PS5 has outsold it earlier this year at a ratio of 5-to-1. It doesn't feel like there's much incentive or interest for the Xbox to keep being a literal box anymore. In a surprisingly candid interview, Phil Spencer said that they had lost the worst possible generation to lose, and that put them in the hole that they're in right now. Xbox's future feels uncertain to me. They are losing bad and have been putting their games on competing systems in a way that makes it feel like the Xbox time as a hardware platform is limited. But still, they've made massive purchases of studios and companies and IP that makes it hard to believe they don't have some big moves still planned in the gaming space. Like, if the plan is to exit the console market, is this their version of Nintendo's gambit with the Wii and later the Switch? Trying something radically different to recapture what they lost in a different form? I don't know. It has been all very up in the air for me, but I gotta be honest, right now I haven't been as excited to see what Xbox's next move is since I was like a 12-year-old. It's like exciting in a really anxiety-inducing way. Are they gonna crash and burn, or are they gonna take that cross and rise again? Take the cross the Xbox was built on, shake it up, flip it upside down to make it work again, and that's the mark of the beast.